Okay. Hey guys. Hey, good morning. Hey guys, we're going to kind of kick off the day, just so that we can kind of stay on time, and we might be able to. We'll make sure we get out on time as well too. But thank you guys. Early morning, first day, pre-day of SAEM, so shout out to all of you for being here nice and early. It takes a lot of effort, and we appreciate your enthusiasm for being here. So we're excited. We're very thankful to be sponsored by both AWEM as well as ADIM for this workshop called Breaking Bias, so Cultivating an Inclusive Environment, which I think is really important because oftentimes we talk a lot about the diversity aspect, like how do you bring people into the doors, but the part that's really is lacking is like once they're there, how do you keep them engaged, how do you support them, and how do you really make it inclusive so that it can be a chance to learn and grow. And this is really where we see our learners kind of struggle with like imposter syndrome and even have over-policing that they're put on corrective actions and all of these things. So we really need to be thoughtful about our role in that and how we can actually be part of the solution. So we're going to plant a little seed here today that we hope will grow into things that you can carry back to your institution and start these conversations. So we have no disclosures here today, and just our objective. So we'll share some common frameworks and language as well too today. We're actually going to talk about how do you apply this in the classroom setting, and then also how do we apply this to the clinical setting, because we see that bias, and we see it all the way around inside the hospital, outside the hospital, within the classroom, and also within the clinical sphere. And so this is really where it's important to start these conversations. And then we also really just want you to walk away with just a few take-home points. And we'll ask you, so during the session, just kind of think in your mind, what are one or two things you're going to actually take back to your own institution? So, and we'll share that probably at the end, just that our call to action is, we found that if you actually say it out loud, you're more likely to do it versus if you think about it, it may or may not happen. So all of us together will share maybe one thing that we want to take away after this workshop. And so here's our agenda, and we're going to try to stay on track here today. So we'll start with kind of our introductions. We have our wonderful keynote speaker, Dr. Cleveland, who's going to be sharing some information with us about inclusive environments. And then we'll kind of go through, after that, it is going to be a completely immersive experience with a lot of workshops and practicing, role-playing. So I just want to plant that seed early for us, that we're all going to be brought to a space that might feel a little bit uncomfortable, but we find that in that space of being uncomfortable, that's where we really see growth, and we really can challenge ourselves to be better. And we want this place to be a place that we can grow. These are our wonderful facilitators here. So if you guys want to raise your hands, shout out to our facilitators. Thank you guys so much for tolerating the multiple emails and emails, including this morning, to kind of get this together, but across the multiple time zones and multiple institutions to really provide a high-yield quality product for you guys and experience for all of you. So thank you to my facilitators. So our ground rules, just want to create some kind of a framework for us as we go into this space, just because it is very challenging to talk about inclusive spaces. We all come in to this space with our own experiences. There might be something back in your mind that kind of is bothering you at home or at work. And so we want to kind of like leave all of that at the door and kind of walk in here ready to be engaged to learn from each other. And I love this quote, there's no growth, no comfort in growth and no growth in comfort. And I think that's really the important thing. I'll give my own disclaimer. I'm an introvert at heart, completely 100%. So I find my restoration in being by myself, apparently, or like being in small groups of people. But it really is like by being uncomfortable that we can really challenge ourselves to be better and to grow. And so I love this. I actually had finished a Teaching for Equity fellowship about 2 years ago now. And I love that they had actually started that longitudinal program with this. And they actually talked about, instead of saying maybe safe spaces, talking about brave space, because we don't know what people are walking with. And so it says, like, together we'll create a brave space, because there's no such thing as a safe space. We exist in a real world. We all carry scars, and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to be more truth and love. And I'll let you read the rest, but essentially it's saying, like, it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of energy to step into the space and be engaged, to do those role playings, to participate, to be involved. And so this is why, instead of saying it's a safe space, we don't know how it feels to everyone in the room, but we'll call you into that space of being brave, to share with yourself, because each of you have something for all of us to learn from. And so we'll together kind of engage in this space together and be brave. So with that, we're going to kind of kick it off with our whole person introduction.
Great, thank you so much, Sree. So good morning, everybody. Good morning. Hey, good morning. So I'm Emily Cleveland Manchanda. It's great to be with you all here today. We're going to start out, in part because we have a small group, which is wonderful, by co-creating this space together. And part of co-creating a space means understanding who is in the room with us. And so we're going to use what we've deemed whole person introductions as one of the tools, and this is something that you can choose to take back into your space and use at home, as a means of making the invisible pieces of our identities explicit and more visible. And it allows each of us to call into this space the aspects of ourselves that we find important or meaningful in some way. And so I will demonstrate this. You can share as much or as little about yourself and your identities as you would like. The goal, though, is to say more than I'm Emily and I'm a PGY 8. Because you are more than just your role and wherever you are in your medical training, presumably. I mean, when you're in residency, I understand sometimes it feels like that is the only thing that you are, but it's not. So I am Emily Cleveland Manchanda. I use the she series pronouns, and I racialize as white. I am ethnically Armenian, Irish, and a descendant of some of the first Anglo-colonizers of what is now Canada and the United States. I am an emergency physician by training. I practice clinically at Boston Medical Center, where I run a health equity fellowship for nurses and physicians, and actually spend most of my time professionally working for the American Medical Association, where I'm the director for social justice education and implementation. I am also a mom to 3 kiddos, one of whom has significant physical and cognitive disabilities, and so disability justice is a particular interest of mine. And I'm in an interracial marriage with an incredible Indian human, and so have an interest in sort of how we create more inclusive cultural spaces across both families and professional lives. That's my introduction. And I am going to ask that if you are comfortable introducing yourself on the mic, you do so, and we just create some space here. And we dedicated a lot of time to this section because I think this is really important for understanding sort of who's in this space with us. Lucky Denise.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'll sit down. Yeah. Okay, hi, nice to meet everyone, and incredibly happy to be in this space and to build a braver space right now and hopefully be able to bring that back to our institution. So I'm Denise Rojas Marcus, and I identify my gender pronoun, she, her, hers. I'm a first-generation immigrant to graduate high school, and to graduate college and med school and grad school and all the fun stuff. I was born in Mexico, and I identify as a Mexican and American and somewhere in between. I am undocumented, and I am a DACA recipient as well, and that has shaped so much of my life and my identity. I'm Bay Area at heart, 510 Bay Area. And so much of my community I bring with me, and I'm currently now a emergency medicine resident at Boston Medical Center. And it's my job and something that I feel passionate about, and I feel like as a whole, though, bringing dignity to people is, I think, the overarching theme of my work and what I strive to do. Yeah.
Just for those who came in, we're just doing a whole person kind of introduction, so we'll, you can share as much or as little as you want to, of course, in this space itself. But I'm Sree Natesan. I'm use she, her pronouns, immigrant, first generation from, my parents are from India, and all of our family is still there. So much of my formative years were visiting my family who weren't able to get any kind of visas or status to come back here. So just seeing the disparities in access to opportunities, I think, really informed my life. As well as living in rural Missouri, which did not want to be desegregated. So that was very interesting to be the first family to walk out there and have that happen. So definitely was interesting years. But I'm APD at Duke University. I've been there now 12 years, which is crazy to believe, and have 4 wonderful kids and an interracial marriage to a wonderful husband who's been very supportive. So inclusive spaces, I think, is really important just in seeing how our family and my kids have struggled kind of through their school years, even though they're very little, in finding their place as well too. So I'm excited to have all of you guys here.
Hi everyone, I'm Caitlin Farrell. I use the she series as well. I racialize as white. I am ethnically Irish, Scottish, and Hungarian. A little bit of Eastern Europe thrown in there. I am one of the attendings at Boston Medical Center. And I guess we're all talking about our main passions. My main passion is incarcerated patients. I come from a background that's been directly impacted by the carceral system, so that's one of my great passions, and also treating all patients with dignity. Besides that, I am a wife and a dog mom, and I'm excited to be here.
Hi, I am Melanie Cheng. My gender pronouns are also she, her, hers. Racially, I identify as mixed. Ethnically, I'm half Chinese, half white, fully Canadian, but transplanted to New York. I am a pediatric hospitalist by trade, but I always find my people in EM, so that's why I end up here multiple years. And I have yet to be to a pediatric conference, but this is my second SAEM. But I'll make it one day. And I'm also the Associate Chief Academic Officer at Kings County for GME, partnering with SUNY Downstate. I'm also a mom of a very feisty 6-year-old. And I'm also in an interracial marriage with my husband is Haitian background. We both come from medical families, but we have a lot of experience with discrimination in medical education. So that's really where a lot of my work comes from.
I'm Smruti. I am an ED attending at Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn. I also use the she, her series pronouns. I racialize as Indian. I grew up in India. I was there until I was 17, just half my life ago, so now you can age me. What else? I guess what's one of my biggest passions has been advocacy and giving people a voice who may not either have the exposure or the opportunity to be able to speak up for themselves. Undocumented patients are actually a focus of mine. I did residency at Kings County. That's actually how I know Mel, and we worked together on a lot of social projects when I was a resident a long time ago. Other social identities, I practice jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. That's why I come to work all calm. That's it for me.
I'm Fiona Gallahue. I identify she, her. My racial and ethnic identity, I primarily Irish. My father's family were Irish immigrants and had a lot of difficulty finding jobs in New York City, so he was a bus driver, and that really formed a lot of my understanding of sort of how limitations in your identity can really impact you. And on my mother's side, Appalachian miners who actually, my great-grandmother was an orphan, and sort of that feeling of kind of not, the lack of support for the marginalized populations is definitely a lot of family history in that experience. Institution and role. I work at the University of Washington in Seattle. I don't really have a role other than faculty member. I've been a GME educator for the last 23 years, and we'll be shifting out of that. So don't really have a role, which is an interesting place to be. But I'm finishing a coaching certification program, which is also sort of an interesting place to be in, and very interested in working with physicians in transition, since that obviously resonates pretty strongly with me. Other social identities that matter for me is that I'm married to a Japanese American man. We both grew up in New York City. We've known each other since we were 14. For those of you who know New York City in the 70s and 80s, not a very friendly environment. His parents were not legal immigrants. They still live in Brooklyn. They don't speak English very well, so he is the translator for them. And in fact, we are often helping them navigate sort of the system at large, which is always interesting and always a challenge, which is also sort of, you start to realize how much translator services are not available everywhere, and the challenges of navigating a system that's not built for the majority, which is also really interesting. And so my children identify primarily as Japanese American, and they all speak Japanese at home. So it's, I am the minority in my household, which is not a bad thing, and constantly challenging me. My husband also is a women's studies major, so the conversations at home are always challenging and always growth-oriented, which is really quite lovely. And recently my older daughter, got a diagnosis of hypermobility syndrome, which explains some chronic pain situations. So the understanding of the hidden disability has also resonated with me recently, of how much we make assumptions when people walk in the room, and judgments. So those are sort of the identities I think I primarily resonate with. So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Turgeon. I use the she series, and I racialize as white. I have my ethnic background. I primarily identify as Italian. That's kind of the one thing that I think growing up that I had cultural ties to. I am a second-year resident at Boston Medical Center. Most of my passions right now are related to social justice, trying to identify ways that we can address structural injustices from a higher level, but also trying to navigate it from a grassroots level. I think I found a lot of my sort of people in the grassroots movements and sort of the more what some people would consider like radical ideas, but I feel like we have to envision the world a better place and do it strongly, even when people tell you that those ideas aren't possible. And so I'm excited to sort of bring those ideas into this space and sort of into the academic world and how we can move it forward. Other aspects about me and social identities, I am the oldest of two sisters, so I'm one of three girls, and if anyone else is an oldest sister, I think that in and of itself is an identity. I'm a cat mom to two cute black cats, and I have a wonderful partner who actually is out here with me, and we just finished doing a lot of hiking and exploring, so feeling very rejuvenated in this space right now, and I'm excited to be here with you all. Thank you.
I am Joey Ciano. I use he, him pronouns. I am racially white. Ethnically second generation Italian American, so culturally I feel very connected to that. Institution. I recently started at UPenn, but I started like last week. So I don't feel very connected to that institution yet, but historically, I'm born and raised from New York. I did my fellowship in global medicine, and I do a lot of education and training-based initiatives, which is kind of why I'm here. I am an APD at a training program, an EM training program in India, so I'm there a lot. Other disaster aid and some humanitarian work I've done as well, but mostly education-based. I am an attending. Other social identities. I'm a gay man, I'm a cat dad. I think that's about it. Yeah, excited to work with you guys and talk today about all this stuff.
Hi, everybody. I am Stacey Frisch. My pronouns are the she series, and I racialize as white. My other identities include being Jewish, being the daughter of an Israeli immigrant, and also my other ancestry is from like Hungary and Czechoslovakia. I am an APD at NYU in New York City, and I am really excited to be here in this brave space with you all and learn from you.
Hi, I'm Christine Stamen. I use the she series pronouns. Racially, I'm white. Ethnically, I'm German and Irish, but most of my ancestors have been in the United States since the 1600s, so I don't really have an ethnic identity other than American. I'm at UEComp, which is University of Illinois College of Medicine in Peoria, so middle of nowhere, lots of rural, lots of red, in a blue state, thank God. Social identities, I'm a non-mom. I'm the cool aunt to 8 nieces and nephews, but I'm also a fur mom. I have 2 adorable huskies, a husky and a husky mix, who I'm happy to share all sorts of pictures with you. I'm also a book dragon, world traveler. I also just came back from hiking, and I'm an introvert who can talk to anybody. So I use that a lot in EM because I find that people just tell me things that they wouldn't tell other people, which helps a lot when I'm meeting people who look nothing like me and have none of the same experiences than I do. So, and I'm the director of wellness education for my residents and the head of well-being for the attendings. So I'm coming at this from that space. We're bringing in our first Black resident this summer, and I really want to make it a good space for him because I want to start to make our residency much more diverse. And if we fail with our first one, we're never gonna get started. So.
Thank you. So I am Josh Pathman. I use the he/him pronouns. I am racially white. I do not have a strong ethnic identity. We're a very just who knows from where family. But sincerely a strong identity as a North Carolinian, because it's kind of the one thing I've always had. So go Duke. So actually it feels bad. I'm a Carolina fan, but I'm from Durham. It's a whole thing. Institution, I'm currently one of the newer APDs at East Carolina University, and with a specific kind of charged mission around wellness within the residency program, not yet faculty. That's a little up-looking for my stage of career. And social identities, I am in the process of kind of looking at myself being not in a relationship for the first time in a very long time, and not as a cat dad for the first time in a very long time. And so that's a whole kind of new thing for me.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Manco, he series. My family came from Russia, escaping the pogroms. So I identify as white, Jewish, privileged white guy. I am the program director at NYU Bellevue. I've been there for 33 years now, so I'm the oldest resident still in captivity. Some of the people in here, I've been their APD, I've been there in their PD. Other social identities, I've been married for 30 years, which means that my wife has put up with me for 30 years. I am an ardent Yankee fan who bleeds pinstripes, and I am a father of 3, a daughter who's 28, a daughter who's 25, and a son who's turning 21. And the idea that my daughters are the age of my residents is absolutely crushing me. So in my role as PD, I'm also the Director of Professional Development for GME at NYU, so I'm kind of the PD for the other PDs, and I think that talking about bias and how we can create a more diverse house staff population, as well as how we can meet the needs of hopefully our very diverse residency, as well as our very diverse patient population, I think is something that we should continue to strive for.
Good morning. I'm Ernesto Romo. I use the he series of pronouns. I am a Mexican immigrant. I'm at WashU in St. Louis, where I was an APD but got out of that lifestyle. Director of simulation and DEI, as well as a coach in our med school coaching program, and really, kind of came into the DEI space through recruitment, and have kind of now I'm looking to how do I pivot my career into that, and really interested in just making our institutions better for everyone, but specifically for the URM folks that we recruit into our institution.
Hello, everyone. My name is Haris Ashraf. I go by the He series, just following the order. My parents descend from Pakistan, mainly. Haven't been back in about 25 years, so not very connected to that land. Beyond that, I am the director of DI at Kaiser in Northern California. We're a fairly new program, so also got into the recruitment space. Other than that, I'm a father to a 3-year-old girl, and we're expecting.
I also have 2 daughters, I forgot. My 40,000 pictures tell a different story.
Redeem yourself. Hello, everyone. My name is Sabrina Bella. I am a PGY2 at University of Connecticut. Her series, racially, and mixed. Ethnically, I'm a lot. On my dad's side, I'm Gujarati Indian and Burmese, and my mom's side, I'm Dutch Indonesian, so I just kind of fill in the bubble of Southeast Asian. But it's interesting because I feel like I'm too white for the brown people and too brown for the white people, and that's been an interesting struggle. Institution and role, I'm a proud Caribbean graduate. I'm from St. George's and currently at University of Connecticut. I just recently matched fellowship at USC in Southern California. Thank you. I'm really happy because that's home for me, so I'm going to anesthesia critical care next. I'm a spawn of Cynthia Price, if any of you guys know her, so that's where I come from. Speaking of Connecticut, other social identities, I too actually recently single, and I feel like that's an interesting space as a 30-year-old female. I'm doing egg freezing on my own, and it's kind of been an interesting thing. I've never been able to dream up what I have now, and so I'm very, very grateful for what I have. It just looks very different. So I'm enjoying that space. Also trying to come into my soft girl era. I've worked really hard over the last decade, and now I'm just I got 2 cats. I rescued 2 little kittens. Their original names were Skunk and Raccoon because they were found in the trash. And I've given them a nice home, and now they're going to be LA kids, and they love avocado already. So I know, it's wild. Cat mom, cool aunt. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm a part of the DEI leadership track at UConn, and so I'm trying to do everything I can to learn and bring those skills to whatever academic institution I'm at, and hopefully stay in that space of addressing health inequities and trying to bridge those gaps, those major gaps. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Petrauskas. I go by the He series. I am white, but ethnically from a variety of different European, but I guess maybe you feel most connected to my Lithuanian heritage. My grandparents spoke Lithuanian in the home and stuff on my dad's side, and that was kind of cool. And then with them passing and stuff, things have kind of faded, but I still occasionally meet a Lithuanian, a true Lithuanian. It's always exciting. So. What else here? So I'm from the University of Florida, College of Medicine. I am a part of the core academic faculty there. And also one of my roles in the department is a well-being champion. So I'm kind of coming at it from that kind of standpoint as well. And then let me just say that you guys have no idea how good you have it. We can't even say DEI or belong in our institution. So to come to this, be able to talk about this stuff is very cool. And take that, DeSantis.
Good morning, everyone. I am Carly Polcyn. I am a PGY2. I use the She series. I racialize as white. Ethnically, I am Polish on my dad's side, removed by about 1 million years. I am the granddaughter of a Croatian immigrant on my mom's side, which I don't identify with because he died of complications from an alcohol use disorder before I was born. So I feel more like an American mutt than anything else. I am, like Nikki had mentioned, oldest daughter being an identity in and of itself. I have 3 younger sisters who are the most important thing in my life. I am a cat mom, as many of you are as well. I grew up in rural Appalachian, Southeast Ohio, which is where a lot of my bridge into the DEI space comes in, mainly in the form of breaking my own biases. The community that I grew up in had 6,000 people. By the last census, 97.5% of them were white. So a lot of my first steps into this community and to this space was not at a teacher level by any means. It was as a learner. And one of the most proud accomplishments I have beyond being first generation in medicine is working through this process to break my own personal biases and then using all of the things I've learned to try to help other people break theirs and sort of laying the groundwork that it's okay to come in with biases. We all have them, and some of us have quite extreme things to unlearn, and that's okay too.
Hi everybody, my name is Alejandro Aviña Cadena. I use the He series. I am a first generation Mexican American who kind of similarly identifies Mexican American somewhere kind of in between, 1 foot here, 1 foot there. Similar to Carly, Nikki, and Denise, I am a resident over at Boston Medical Center. I'm currently a second year. Some social identities for me are, in addition to me being first generation, kind of similar to some others, first gen to kind of graduate high school, college, master's, med school, anything kind of down that route. I am married, met my wife when we were in middle school, so we've been dating since high school, we've been together for a long time. And I am a recent dad to a 3-month-old little girl.
All right. Good morning. I'm just going to take a moment of vulnerability here and just say, wow, this is like so amazing. And I feel very humbled to be in this room as a learner primarily, even though I think my name is on that slide. Hi, everyone. My name is Arlene Chung. I use the She series. This is also new for me, introducing myself as the whole person. I use the She series. I racialize as Asian. Ethnically, I am Korean American. My parents immigrated here from Korea. Although I identify much more on the American side than the Korean side. And I don't really speak the language, which I think is sometimes a surprise to people. I was a practicing emergency physician in New York City for the last 10 years or so, and then very recently made the jump to the University of Vermont, where I'm the vice chair of academic affairs up there. And so moving from one of literally the most diverse places in the world to one of the least diverse places in the world has been a really interesting transition for me socially. I am a mom to a almost 4-year-old. He's going to be 4 next week, and I'm in an interracial partnership. We'll get married eventually, I think, maybe.
It's hard to follow all of that. My name is Leo Garcia. I'm a 4th-year medical student at UCSF. I am a medical student ambassador, so if anything goes awry, I'm here to help. I'm also here as a learner. I use he, him, his. Was born in Bogota, Colombia, raised in Houston, Texas, outside in the suburbs in Katy. I'm also undocumented with DACA, so nice to see a friendly face. And things that bring me into this space. I'm queer. My partner and I are parents to 2 big dogs. You might see us walking around. Got back from hiking in the Grand Canyon before getting here. Applying into emergency medicine if it weren't obvious. And yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you all so much. So just pause for 1 second and think about how this space feels compared to spaces where you come in and everybody just does a quick round of Zoom or otherwise introductions, you say your name and your role. Really different, right? And that took about a minute per person, which feels long, I think, sometimes, right? But gives you such a different environment in which to have conversations. And I will say that I use this in my regular meetings, which sometimes throws people off. But like I said, I do some work with the AMA, and so I'll often meet people through like we're having a topic-specific conversation, and it can go really fast, right? So like I've practiced this a lot, right? This is not the first time that I use whole person introductions. But my whole person introduction, when they say like we're just going around introducing ourselves, is I'm Emily Cleveland Manchanda. I use the She series. I racialize as white. I'm ethnically Armenian, Irish, and a descendant of some of the Anglo colonizers of what's now the United States. I've got 3 kids, one of whom has significant disabilities, and so I have an interest in disability justice. I'm an ER doc, but mostly I work for the AMA here with my title. It's not that long, right? But it gives people a whole different lens through which to see you and to see your understanding of yourself and your positionality in the work. And I've had a number of these meetings where I start off with that, and everybody else is like, oh, I guess I could share more than just my name and my title. And we get to the end, and people who've worked together for years are like, wow, I never knew that about you. And it creates a really different feel and a more inclusive feel, even for people who have worked together in their same roles and in their same ways for many years. And so I'd invite you to think about the spaces where you can bring this into your work. I'm going to just step up here with some notes because I can't do everything completely off the cuff, as much as my EM self would like to do that. I also just want to give a quick shout out to Dr. Manko because I don't even know if you remember this, but I started out my residency training in plastic surgery at NYU Bellevue. And my oldest son was a 25-weeker. And not to hate on the plastics program there, but I will a little bit. Like 2 weeks after my crash C-section, I got a call from my program director. I was like, so when are you coming back to work? I was like, my kid's on 100% FiO2, 4 pressors, so like, not tomorrow? And they asked if I wanted to just go be a mom for a year. And I was like, how about that research fellowship we talked about? Anyway, long story made very short, the folks in emergency medicine gave me the opportunity to rotate through the ED to make sure that it wasn't just like the grass is greener. It actually is greener in EM. And so I'm deeply grateful for that opportunity, which led me to be in this work and to be here today. So just want a brief shout out for those like small moments of connection. So I want to shift to talking a little bit about, we've mentioned that we're going to do some things that are uncomfortable today. And so I'm going to walk you through a thought exercise. So just sit back for a sec, get yourself comfortable. I won't make you meditate, although I do think it's a very helpful tool, or at least not yet. But I want to walk you through a quick thought exercise. And if you've seen this before and you sort of like know the punchline, then like, bear with me. How many folks in the room have heard that George Washington had wooden teeth? Yeah? Cool. Like commonly held, like this is true, right? Except turns out it's not. When folks at the Museum of Dentistry looked at his dentures, they found that they were made out of gold, lead, hippopotamus, horse, and donkey teeth. Which is like, a little gross. So how did that little piece of like historical trivia make you feel? Anybody? Any thoughts, feelings? George Washington had like animal teeth. Meh. Where did he get the hippopotamus, right? Sorry, thank you, yes. Yeah, it's like, how is that even possible in like, right? In the 1800s? Yeah. Yeah, like what was the history of that piece of ivory, right? And sorry, Denise, what'd you say?
Just like why so many different animals, just like one.
Why not just pick one, right?
One donkey upset rather than 15 animals.
Right. So like, okay, interesting trivia, but like, not like a huge emotional response, right? So what if I told you though that he had another set of false teeth? And what if I told you that those dentures were made from the teeth of enslaved people? How did that feel? What's the feeling in your body? Pause for a second and just like, how does that feel? Yeah, a little gross, right? Maybe a lot gross. And we could have a whole conversation about where those teeth came from, if he compensated the people from whom they were taken, which it looks like maybe he did. We can have a whole separate conversation. This is not a talk, though, about George Washington's teeth. The point is actually just to give you a barometer about how you feel when presented with new information about something that makes you uncomfortable. That feeling of your, like, for me, it's like here. It's like a, oh, like down in my stomach. For some people, it's like a tightness in the back of your neck, where people feel things differently in different parts of their body. Most of the time in our professional lives, though, we go around not paying attention to anything that's happening in our bodies, right? It's all in the brain, right? We're having conversations using our intellect, et cetera. So I'm going to ask you to pay attention throughout the day today, because we're going to make you uncomfortable. Not in the same way that I just did, but you will at some point be a little bit uncomfortable. And so I'm going to ask you to try to pay attention to your body and to where you're feeling some of that discomfort. Because we know that anytime we are challenged, whether cognitively or physically, parts of our brain light up, and it can complicate our responses to things. And so I'm going to talk to you for a moment about core beliefs. So our core beliefs are the things that people cherish the most deeply. These are the things that come out of, it's how we see ourselves in the world. It's who we are. It's some of the things you just shared, right? It's where our ancestors came from. It's where we grew up and the things that our communities believe to be true because for them they are true. It's our version of reality. Our core beliefs are inflexible, rigid, and really sensitive to being challenged, right? These are the things like you're a dog person and only a dog person and you cannot make me a cat person. Right? Or these are the things like guns don't kill people, people kill people, right? These are our core beliefs. And whenever they get challenged, right, these are the things about like our sort of traditions, our religion, our family, shaped by our life experiences. Whenever these are challenged, our brains light up. And we know if you put people into MRIs, like this is all based on neuroscience, you have the same part of your brain light up when you challenge someone's core belief as you do if a tiger walked in that door. It's the same part of your brain that responds. The threat might take different forms, but the neurologic response is the same. And this is really important for us to recognize as we're creating braver spaces, creating safer spaces, having conversations with people about how to create more equity, because in many of those spaces, people, with the ideas that we're putting forward, many people feel threats, right? And we're seeing some of that response to that threat in the ways that laws are being shaped, in the ways that people are resisting efforts to make things more equitable. And so it's helpful for me to realize that when people's brains are lighting up, that I can create opportunities for them to pause, understand that it's not actually a tiger in the room, understand our mutual benefit and collective liberation being tied up into whatever we are offering, and help them to get to a place where they can calm down and listen. And so as you start to feel something in your body today, hopefully you will notice it, being primed for it, I'll invite you to just pause, identify that there's a threatening thought or idea or challenging thought or idea. There's not actually a tiger in the room. And that will hopefully get you to a place where you're able to listen a little bit more, sort of reflect on what is happening in a more sort of integrated way. So with that, give me 1 second, I'm just gonna open this up. If I can remember my password. There we go. All right, so I want to think about this idea of sort of threat just a little bit more. So while I think everybody will have that sort of visceral hindbrain response if a tiger walks in the room, the aspects of our identities that are threatened by different ideas are really highly variable and often hidden. And I think as we're creating spaces where there are opportunities for people to be more themselves, it's helpful to both be aware of the identities that are in the room, but also to realize that we can't do that every time, right? We're having a space. And so I'll offer you that, like, every human, no matter where you come from, no matter your identities, has a fundamental need for three things. And it actually came up a lot in the conversation here today. We all have a need for safety, right? Both physical and psychological safety, but especially the physical safety. We all have a need for dignity, right? And that came up a lot in our conversation about what's important to us. And we all have a need for belonging. Those are like three deeply fundamental, universally held across cultures aspects of what it means to be human. We all need to be safe, to have dignity, and to feel a sense of belonging. And much of the resistance that we see to DEI work emerges from people feeling that one of those three aspects is threatened. And so when we think about designing our conversations to bring more people into the work, I've found it really helpful to try to understand where that resistance is coming from. Like, am I threatening somebody's sense of safety? Am I threatening somebody's sense of potential dignity? Or am I often threatening somebody's sense of belonging? And that's a space that we can talk about, especially as white folks in this work, and I'm like a white person in racial justice work. I spend a lot of time talking to other white people about how undoing racism or ending racism benefits us. And we can have that as a separate talk sometime. But threatening people's sense of belonging is often that like deep-seated, like the root sort of concern from which resistance to DEI work emerges. And so I want to spend a moment, we're not going to have a talk on like microaggressions and implicit bias, because I think folks are mostly familiar with that, at least in concept. But I will just say that the ways that unconscious bias and implicit bias shows up are really different. And the piece that we often talk about around microaggressions, we're going to talk about strategies for addressing microaggressions. I just want to contextualize briefly, and I'm going to try to be really brief here. Like what we feel, that visceral response, when someone says something to us is deeply shaped by who we are and what we've recently experienced. And so if you are like me, the parent of somebody with significant disabilities, and you overhear a conversation between some of your colleagues saying like, oh my God, they just added this new module around like taking care of wheelchair-bound people, and it's so annoying that we have to do another one of these, whatever, complaining about it. Or somebody complaining to their fellow classmate about like, oh, did you know that she just got extra time on her test? She's totally faking this disability just to get extra time and get better scores so that she can go like to whatever competitive residency. When you hear that as me, right, your response is very different. My response is very different because that's a threatening idea, the idea of like faking an invisible disability or like the begrudging, like, oh, I have to like learn more about this special snowflake population, threatens the idea that my child will have the opportunity to get safe medical care. It threatens the idea that my child will have the dignity of being given enough time to demonstrate his skills, right? And you would never know that about me, right? Like I'm a neurotypical, fully privileged, like to Jeff's point earlier, like I've got all the privilege except being a man. But like everything else, like I fall in that bucket, right? In the center of that privilege power thing. But my social identities connect me to people whose identities are marginalized. And so my response to hearing those things is received as a microaggression in a way that it wouldn't have been a decade ago. So that evolution over time is important to understand, and the context is really important to understand as well. Similarly, if you, like me, have all the privilege, and you look like somebody who belongs as a doctor, now like 50 years ago I wouldn't have, right? It'd still be like, I'd be a lady doctor. But now it's like pretty typical, right? Especially in emergency medicine. If you ask me, oh, where'd you go to med school? It's like a curiosity question, like, oh, I went to Penn. Cool place. But if you ask Alejandro, or if you ask Denise, or if you ask any of our Black residents where they went to med school, that can be received as like, tell me you belong here. Prove to me you went somewhere bright and shiny where you're gonna, I'm not really sure. I wanna check your credentials. Right? And that context is really important for us as educators, as people who are routinely asking our new interns, like, oh, where'd you grow up? Oh, where are you from? Right? A really innocent question, or a well-intentioned question of asking people to bring in more of themselves into those spaces can be received completely differently if you're asking me versus if you are asking somebody whose identities are marginalized. And understanding that can allow us to set the context. And so for me, when I'm asking questions like that, I'm like, hey, I'm really interested in getting to know each of my residents in terms of who they are and like what identities they bring into these spaces. This is my background, this is where I came from, whatever. Would love to hear, a little bit more about you, right? And that's a super different question than like, so where are you from? No, where are you really from? Where are you really, so where are your parents from, right? And that whole line of questioning that I think we've come to recognize as harmful, sometimes harmful. I don't want to overly generalize. And so, I think we've all probably seen some version of these slides, but the effects of microaggressions on people who carry identities that are marginalized are profoundly harmful. This work from Dowan, Boatwright, and amazing other folks was done in a qualitative way, and basically they interviewed residents who have marginalized identities and found sort of 3 key themes of their experience of residency training in emergency medicine. Essentially a daily barrage of microaggressions and bias from their peers, from their patients, from kind of everybody around them. Being challenged to be sort of the race and ethnicity ambassadors, the first of the representative of like, oh, well, if you can't succeed, then maybe people like you can't here. Right? That sort of pressure of being the person from your group, and just persistent experience of being othered, of being sort of different from or divergent from the people who are otherwise there. you can imagine the cognitive effects of that. And that has been discussed again in the literature by many people. This is a great article from my dear friends and colleagues, many of whom I trained with, that I'd offer. So, I think there's emerging evidence that this is deeply problematic and that we can do something about it. There's a great article from Sherry Ann Burnett-Bowie that I actually didn't include in here, but I can share with folks after the fact, demonstrating that trainings like this, microaggression trainings and sort of an understanding of structural drivers of inequities, can actually predict increased response when seeing either a racist policy or a microaggression happening. And so congratulations, you're in the room. You're going to be better when you walk out. I think I'll just close this section by noting that today we're really hoping to give you some tools to help you be more aware of yourself, your identities, in service of creating more inclusive and sort of open spaces for other people. This is not about tone policing or canceling anybody. I think when people feel canceled, it's because they don't see the ways in which creating these more open spaces will actually benefit them. And so especially for folks who have identities that are more privileged, I would encourage you to reflect on how that process of doing whole person introductions and creating more open space for ourselves actually made you feel better. Because it's not just about making people with marginalized identities feel more comfortable in white spaces. It's actually about undoing white supremacy culture and white spaces to create something that's better for all of us. And so lastly, I'll just say we're not actually going to change everything overnight. We're not going to make the desert a rainforest, but we can create conditions in which everybody can thrive, even as we are looking to address these broader structural challenging forces that are shaping our opportunities for health and how we engage with each other. We're not going to undo capitalism in medicine today, and we can create spaces to be more human amidst those challenges in all of the places that we work. All right, so as I said, we're going to give you some tools, and I'm really excited to not be talking to you too much longer. But the first piece of this is going to be a role play. So everybody just take a minute, deep breath. You're going to have to talk to each other. You're going to have to role play, and I'm so sorry, but it's going to make you better. We're going to be spending some time today working on a number of these different pieces, though. Like I said, the idea is to create more inclusive spaces. I call this container building. This is not my idea. People call this container building. We started with a number of these things. So you saw the identity explicit introductions that's there. We're going to talk about embodied learning next. The community agreements and community values we're actually going to talk about as well. And throughout this, I invite you to stay in touch with your body, right? That grounding piece of how's your body feeling right now? It's not just a cognitive exercise, it's a whole person exercise throughout the day today. All right, role play part 1. You guys ready? We are going to divide up into groups of 3 people. And if you are an organizer of this activity, you are exempt. Congratulations. The 2 of you escape. Everybody else gets to get into a group of 3. So let's just form your groups of 3, if you don't mind, because we're going to ask for 2 people are going to be the active speaking people, and 1 person is not going to be an active speaker in each triad. So if there's somebody who you're I can't, really, that's okay, right? You can be person number 3 in your triad. So let's break up into groups of 3. Decide who's going to be person 1, 2, and 3. You'll get a chance to switch your roles up at the end. Yeah, let's organize ourselves into groups of 3 for now. Yeah. Pick a group, any group. Just turn and connect. Maybe by somebody. No, Carly, you're not exempt. You're not exempt. You're not exempt. Organizers are not exempt. Only Shruti and Alejandro are exempt. And if we have an odd number, then one of us will fill in. So, sorry. You're perfect. You're perfect. Okay. Do you need somebody still? Stepping out for now, but thank you very much. Yeah. No, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay, does everybody have a group of 3? Are there any like unmatched people? We don't want any, we can scramble. Everybody has a group? You're supposed to be. It's okay, we can have 2 observers. Yeah, we can have 1 group of 4. We can have 2 observers, or you can swap things up in the middle. Okay, so to get your assignments, has everybody decided if you're gonna be person 1, 2, or 3? Yes? Okay, cool. So here's some QR codes. You're gonna have to walk up to the screen to get these because otherwise your camera's not gonna know which one to grab. So grab your assigned thing. This should take you to a Google document that will tell you your role. Yes. No, the person 3 is the non-speaking person, okay? And if anybody has trouble getting these, let me know and we can figure it out. Doesn't want to grab it for you? No? There you go, maybe. Yeah? Okay, the Google Docs should be open access. Does everybody have it? Okay. So hopefully everybody can get access to their role. We're going to take 2 minutes now for you to review your role, perhaps jot down some notes about what you want to say. If you're person 1 or person 2. If you're person 3, just take a break. Breathe, meditate. And we'll get started at the top of the hour, so 2 minutes to sort of prepare your thoughts. Okay, is anybody having trouble getting access to the documents? Which person are you supposed to be? Okay, perfect. This is you. Does everybody have their role? Okay, raise your hand if you need more time to prep. Oh, you're perfect. Okay, yep. Take your time. Oh, Nikki, are you in a group of 4? Do you and Arlene? No, how about you and Arlene and Alejandro? You can be the observer for them because you're going to do some. So, Nikki, is that okay? Can I pull you in? Okay, Arlene, you're person 1. Nikki, you're person 2. Is that okay? So scan number 1. Okay, so take a moment to just gather your thoughts, and then when you are ready, please split into your little triad, and we're going to give you about 5 minutes to go through this role play. 5 minutes might feel real long, especially if you're in the hot seat. So get started, and then we will circle back and debrief thereafter. Okay? Cool. Go for it.
You're playing your role. It's okay, it's
Okay, everyone. You can finish your sentence.
I'll just talk about what
You look so uncomfortable.
Yeah, I can kind of talk about a little bit. How are we feeling, you guys? Are we okay to do a little debrief? You guys can finish the buds. Yeah, in a little bit. How was that for everybody? Super comfortable? Who were the residents, the chief residents? Who were the chief residents in these situations? Okay. Okay. I can kind of share a little bit about, so I was observer 3 in this one. I'm going to talk a little bit about, and then just kind of pass it around a little bit for the observers and kind of see what you saw, how you felt, and then if you kind of saw anything else, we can kind of continue talking. But so in this situation, we had our chair talking to our chief resident, and it was a little weird just because I know you and I know how wholeheartedly you like don't agree with ever the stuff you were physically saying. But there was like some noticeable stuff with like at the beginning when you guys were talking, you guys were both kind of just sitting and just kind of like towards each other. But then at some point you got really excited about like, well, no, like this is what we're supposed to be doing. And you kind of was starting like, instead of just kind of sitting back, like you sat forward and you like open up your like palms towards Nikki and you were kind of like talking with her. While like every time like you were channeling your inner chair, you were kind of leaned back, and every time you tried to use your hands, you would kind of just like you use air quotes and kind of step back a little bit. So it would just be like a little bit of a different things. I don't know if that felt super comfortable for either of you, or I don't know, how was that?
I was incredibly uncomfortable. I was thinking, I was like, oh, I'm holding my breath right now. I have not breathed in like many seconds.
Yeah.
And I can feel, even like still sitting here now, I'm like, okay, I can relax now. I can feel my my shoulders are super tense right now.
Yeah.
And my like core is like really engaged because I was like, I don't know what to say. So I'm gonna relax.
Good.
But it was not comfortable.
Yeah, the biggest thing at least that I saw here was just like the changes in body language, where like the more that you dug deep of like, well, no, we don't want to lower our standards, and like I just felt like you're just like inner dying inside. And then when you were like advocating for it, you got excited and you put your arms out and you like leaned forward and you're like, no, but you're so wrong, and you're kind of talking about it. Was that similar? Who were the observers? And so you were observer. Was that somewhat similar to what some other people kind of saw from their groups? 100%. Anyone want to kind of chat a little bit about?
Well, I thought it was fantastic that our resident was playing the program director. So, but it was also interesting because I could definitely see the lack of resonance in her body of like, this is not the position. Like, there was almost a cardboard quality to it, and the more like, also felt more like I can almost see you sort of sitting back and kind of like, closing up a little bit. And the more you were kind of closing up and saying your words, and taking your position, I could see you being like, I'm getting hot. Like, you just said it. You were like, I'm getting hot. And you're like, really, like, still trying, like, the more you were closing up, the more you were like trying to, like, like, get the body, like, there was just a lot of, like, movement in your body language, and there was a new lack of body. And you could just,
How many of you have been in this position at work? Yeah. And how many of you, during your real life, right, either here or in your real life situation, have you been able to kind of take a pause in the middle of the conversation? Did anyone take a pause today? Like in the middle? Oh. Right. Yeah. So I definitely, I walked around and overheard some of the conversations. It's very, right, I think when you have these discussions where you're trying to advocate for somebody and the other person is in a position of privilege, I think one of the hardest things is that emotional dysregulation, right? You feel defensive, you feel that, that feeling in your stomach, right, that Emily was talking about. And the other person is not feeling that discomfort because they have everything they need, right, and they're in a position to give you something. But unfortunately, what happens is that this means a lot more to you than it does to them, and that you're going to get more emotional than they are, and it can get in the way, right? So, what are some strategies that some of you use today for it?
well, I was an observer, and I think one of the things that was very interesting is that our chair obviously didn't believe in what she was saying. Because rightly so. But I think one of the things that they do in like debate teams on a regular basis is they make you take the opposite stance of what you would want ahead of time and figure out all those arguments for that stance so you can counter them later. And I think going into that conversation to kind of take that emotion out, figure out what their arguments are going to be and how can I do it. Like one of the conversations was we need qualified applicants. So I was like, well, why don't we challenge what qualified means? That's a very good question because how can you say they're qualified? If they had all the privileges, you mentioned that, but how about how much credit should we give somebody from literally pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and going from no support at all to making it successfully in their residency program? So I think taking that other viewpoint ahead of time so you can kind of prep it, it helps take that emotion out when you actually have to challenge it.
That's an excellent point, right? Like putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And I think I heard Stacey start challenging Denise about like, what do you mean? So maybe our standards need to be different, right? How we define our standards is different. I think that's an excellent strategy. What did anyone else use any other ways to kind of regulate their emotions? Go ahead. Yeah.
So my thing is kind of related to what you're saying, but I noticed that, so I'm a fourth-year med student, so I'm still kind of figuring out this whole thing. But it's really interesting because even as the challenger, I think taking into account like your status and your privilege, like as a minority woman, like it could be difficult when you are being challenged or finding that strength to continue. And so I think part of that is like considering even as the challenger what your stance is and the things that maybe people don't believe when you say, because people don't believe it when you say things if you're a woman or if you're a minority. And so I really liked what you said about figuring out like what they would say and then kind of practicing coming up with rebuttals for that. But I don't know, I guess it's a question I'm turning back to the audience, I guess, as a minority woman, how do you find that confidence or that strength to kind of like keep speaking up for what you know is right, but someone else is telling you isn't, because it's kind of a hermeneutic injustice.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is time.
Yeah.
Obviously, like I'm very different now as simulation faculty who keeps like debriefing people all the time compared to 7 years ago when I was a med student,
right.
And got talked all over all the time. So time and experience is one of it, but also having kind of believing. I think believing in what you're saying comes from actually like finding a group of people that have similar ideas to you, and that can validate you, right? Especially people in a position of power who have the same ideals as you can provide you with that confidence and that mentorship to be in a better position where you can feel like very validated in your argument. Melanie?
Yeah, I played the resident, and I've been in that position many times. I felt like it felt more familiar than if I played the opposite role, like that it would have been actually harder. And I didn't feel like I got emotionally like
I'll label it myself. I'll be like, okay, so you're getting upset, right? Or you're getting heated, right? You're getting whatever it is, and then just saying those words in my head actually helps me to then frame the next words I'm going to say out to make sure it has that clarity that it needs to actually like put whatever point across that I need to, just so that it doesn't become a debate, right? Because that's not going to help. We have to call people into the space instead of calling them out, and that really is what will help them to kind of be on the same page.
That's an excellent point, right? It's like,
So I got to play the program director. It was very fun. Fully assumed the role of the Caucasian male program director. It was very, I enjoyed it. I think that like the main challenge that you had was because you were trying to make me care about something that I didn't care about, and that my character just fundamentally did not care about. You were saying no, but we should have a diverse program, and I was just like, why? Like in my head, I'm just like, do we? Like I'm not convinced with that. I'm not convinced that a slew of what I consider to be the best trained white doctors aren't better than 80-year-old population that's just mixed and diverse. Like you can't and you were trying to convince me of something that I just didn't want to care about. And I think that's the hard part. And I've been in your shoes, and so like, it was not hard for me to like cosplay the other side.
sort of gonna bring it all together, right? Is like a lot of it. It's preparation before the conversation, then it's regulating yourself during the conversation. Hey, Ernesto, yeah.
I think one of the things I've done is just acknowledge that conversations on race about DEI topics, they're as a society we don't have them, and they're high-risk conversations. So just acknowledging like, hey, thanks for engaging in this discussion. It's difficult. Like naming some of that just helps to lessen some of it.
Yeah.
And then my wife's a psychologist, so full disclosure, I believe in therapy. But one of the like newer kind of in vogue kind of therapy methods is the tools. I don't know if you guys. There's a documentary with Jordan Hill. Anyways, this guy feels sus, but it's very proactive, and one of them is this thing like tunnel of love. And so when you know you're going to be with someone that's like going to be like you're going to have this high-stake conversation, and your body's going to be involved. And you just kind of spend like a minute trying to like feel all the love you can feel to then like bring that energy into the room. Yeah. So I think a lot of these things are important, but even just acknowledging like, oh, I'm super anxious to have this discussion, like that helps to kind of, I think, bring your best, most emotionally regulated self to some of these discussions.
I agree. Like, don't show up to these conversations after 2 hours of sleep and after having an argument with your dog. It's just like, I mean, the point is, right, believe in what you have to say. And if things are going awry, something we use in simulation a lot is just ask a lot of why questions. And I think I heard you say it. I actually loved it. You were role-playing with Ernesto. And at one point you were like, okay, so what would you think about me? I came from a Caribbean med school. How would you assess me as a physician? Sometimes, right, and sometimes it's even simpler than that. It's like, well, I just don't think that, we should sacrifice our standards for improved diversity. Why not? Just try to get them into a position where they have to question themselves. And it's kind of, right, it's like you're basically asking them a series of questions to get them to the answer that you know they're going to get to eventually. And they may not get to it by the end of that conversation, maybe a series of conversations, but you're going to plant a seed in their mind that's going to make them start questioning their line of thought. Any other insight from anyone who was able to successfully get what they want?
I would just say in a conversation, sometimes sometimes it's helpful to have not just one person in the room, so diffusing the dynamic would be really helpful. Especially if you know that maybe they have a different relationship with the person, and so like that whole building, the walking in and sort of building, like, I know these are the things that we've talked about before that you care about, so that you can start that conversation, and that the other person, you've already role played it, you've already like anticipated the problems, I try never to walk into those rooms
hindbrain. That there's a tiger in the room self, right? Denise, you want to? Yeah, go ahead. A 1000% that. So we're running, as I always tend to do, a little bit behind our planned schedule, which is perfect. It's not a problem at all. But I'm going to keep this part really brief, in part because we've actually talked about a lot of this already. One of the strategies that sort of came up in the conversation is preparation ahead of time, right? And so like you've got this like line of reasoning, your rationale, your arguments, you know who you're speaking to, you know what they care about, you've thought about why they might be interested in or resistant to whatever you're proposing. That's incredibly helpful in terms of cognitive preparation. The other piece of cognitive preparation that I have found to be extremely helpful goes to that, like, don't come into the room by yourself. You also don't want to come into the room with like 6 people so that the person you're talking to feels like threatened and attacked, right? So like thinking about who those people are is really important, but also understanding our roles. And I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Oh, it's Kamna.
Hi, Kamna. Emily. As Kamna raised, thinking about our identities and our roles in that room can be incredibly helpful, right? I can't tell Denise's story in the way that Denise can tell her story, right? I shouldn't tell Denise's story for her. She should be in the room to tell her story. And as a profoundly privileged white woman, I can play a different role because when I say something with my degrees from Ivy League institutions, it is received differently by people in power, right? Because I can walk into boardrooms and get up on stage and people are like, oh, she's gonna know what she's talking about, that like presumed competence. And so when I say things like, hey, we should be challenging our systems because the people we're bringing into medicine aren't the best people to take care of our patients, even if they have the best numeric scores, people are like, wait, what? But you're one of those people. Right? And so that lands differently, right? And so thinking about who your allies are and who should be saying which pieces of which arguments to which people is a really key strategic point. And so that's sort of the cognitive piece. Step out of that cognitive piece for a second into the embodied piece, which is the like understanding what works and what's getting in your way. And so that leaning forward of like, I'm really invested, I really believe in this, it's really important to me and my people and everybody who's depending on me to make you believe and care, right? Getting people to care, like convincing people to care or to see each other's humanity is like 3/4, 90% maybe of DEI work. And when they fail to do that, that is so deeply, viscerally disappointing to us, right? That we get caught up in the emotion behind the argument. And it doesn't usually help, right? It doesn't usually get people to care. The way that we bring people into conversations, the the way that we call people in, right, is not usually through like telling them that they're not caring enough, right? In the same way that like calling somebody racist never works. Learn from my experience. Doesn't work, doesn't help. Not saying we shouldn't name racism where we see it, but there are ways to do it without calling people racist. But the emotional regulation in this work is critically important, not just for like the sake of like moving the work forward, but also for saving ourselves. Because if you are continuously in that hyperactivated, emotionally high, hot state, it's exhausting. I mean, it's literally stress-inducing, right? Like you use all your cortisol, and then you're really, really exhausted afterwards. So a few strategies for sort of that regulation. One is to just be aware that is to set the intention before these conversations of paying attention to yourself. And this is a skill. This is a learned skill. This is something you have to practice. This is not how we are socialized. This is not what we are taught to do in med school. But when you walk into a trauma bay, that 0-point survey includes pausing, maybe taking your own pulse, right? There are lots of strategies for centering yourself back in your body, getting yourself out of your head a little bit. Box breathing is a really easy one. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, and pause. Do it 3 times, and I mean, there's like lots of neuroscience behind this, so I'm not gonna go into all of that, but literally just pausing to take a breath before you walk into a room will let you come in a more level, grounded, calm space so that you're speaking like this and not speaking like your inner New Yorker who's really excited to get somebody to do something. It creates a really different environment, right? And it presents that like we have lots of time to talk about this. Similarly, setting the frame that like you are not going to boil the ocean, right? Racism was not created in its current form in a day. It was created in 400 or 500 centuries of self-compounding, building, multi-headed hydra ways. And the work that we're doing to undo it, to end it, has to take that same form, right? The moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, right? But only if we pull really hard on it. And just thinking about yourself as one of the people, not the only person, if this is not the only conversation, sort of setting that frame for yourself can help, it helps me breathe in a little bit and relax. The other piece that I would just offer for this is like paying attention to your physical position and things. And I have a few things, I literally have breathe tattooed on the inside of my wrist. I need a reminder. But for me, I will regularly just like put a thumb there and be like, oh, right, I'm not breathing. And if I have my thumbs there, I can't be holding my hands or I can't be crossing my arms or like leaning on the table or like this. Like if I have my hands together, it creates a physical reminder for me to slow down and sit back and breathe. And that sitting back also, again, makes it a more invitational space. So thinking about your body position, preparing yourself ahead of time, but also in the moment to pause and breathe, and recognizing that this is a longer conversation than whatever the one conversation you're having is actually going to be, is really helpful. And so even when you don't make your program director believe these things or get them to care, it's often helpful to say, you know, this was a really helpful conversation to me. I actually am understanding a lot more about where your concerns are, where you're coming from, and I would love to continue this conversation. Could we set up another time to chat in a few weeks? Just creates the opportunity to not only have that conversation again, but also for you to go back, rethink about what they care about, and sort of re-strategize. All right, I think we're now thoroughly over behind time. So I'm gonna turn the mic back over. I think we are going, this is another tool that I was gonna introduce to you. Okay, cool. So I think I shared with you all, I'll go to that in 1 second. I shared with you all sort of how we do whole person introductions, right, on my team at the AMA and elsewhere. One of the other strategies that we use in our recurring meetings, especially with people who we work with frequently over time, is a tool called the window of tolerance. And so this window of tolerance, it's a numeric scale that is meant to describe your sort of energy level at any given moment. -10, it runs -10 to +10. -10 is like catatonic, you should probably be hospitalized. +10 is manic, you should probably be hospitalized. Most people function in that -5 to 5 range pretty well. And you can't be 0 because you always have some life force. I will also say negatives don't necessarily mean like bad things. It's not negative like in a bad way. It just means you're like chill, like a little bit lower energy today. Or like, oh, I didn't get a ton of sleep, so I'm just like physically like, I'm like a -2. It's fine, my mood is fine. I'm just like a little bit lower energy. Right now, I'm like a 4 because I don't actually love public speaking. And so like my energy level is pretty up right now. we use this on my, my non-clinical team as a way of gauging sort of where people are day to day, and as a way of letting people signal when they're not okay. And so if we are going through check-ins and somebody on my team checks in at a -7, it gives us all a moment to pause and say, what do you need from us today? Because if somebody checks in at a 7, the way that I did last week, it gives me the opportunity to say, like, I am so overwhelmed by the amount of work that I have to do this week that I can't take on anything extra. And it lets everyone else know it's a really bad time to pitch new ideas, right? Because I'm not in a place to hear it, right? And so it gives us a numeric tool that's a shorthand, and especially when you're doing this over time with people who you work with, it's like, oh, I'm checking in at 2, I'm good. I'm checking in at 3, I'm good. I'm checking in at -2, which is my usual, I'm good. Like, everybody sort of knows where people fall, and if there's an outlier, it gives us a moment to pause and bring in a little bit more of our humanity to check in with someone. So if you're checking in at 7, it's like, do you need us to do a brief grounding? Like, should we take 5 minutes, take a few breaths? Do you need to, like, go for a walk? Like, whatever you need, right? It lets us, again, be more human in our spaces. And so I'd offered this as sort of a second tool in addition to the whole person introductions piece that I've found to be really useful, particularly when I'm working with people routinely, like, on a regular basis. Any questions about this? No? Cool. We didn't invent this, I should also say. This comes from Denny Butler McKay and Abigail Ortiz at the Southern Jamaica Plain Health Center, who are 2 of the most amazing racial justice trainers I've ever found. But again, I can send you all the links. So I think that it is now time, oh, yeah, well, your brains are there, for our first response training piece. Yeah? Are we ready? I'm going to pass the mic too. Charlie?
Fun fact about me, I also hate public speaking, and I somehow continuously get involved in this space over and over again. So,
Thank you.
Can I ask the 2 of you passing the SLOEs around? Yeah. And then Denise, can I borrow your laptop, please? Back a little ways. Perfect.
This one can probably
Whichever is fine.
be like this.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. So, hi everyone. I know we just had a very long and in-depth session, sort of getting to know each other and being in these vulnerable roles. So we are going to sort of regroup and recollect and sort of start the session with also a little bit of didactic. So our main session is going to be discussing allyship, specifically in SLOEs and feedback. One of the things that I like to do to sort of cope is to sort of address the awkwardness of feeling. So I would like to recognize my own vulnerability as a second-year resident sitting in a room of APDs and PDs and program leadership and telling them how to review SLOEs and applications. But I tried my best, so bear with me. So I love quotes, and because of this, I want to open with one. And I want to read it out loud to you because I feel like this one is very profound. And yes, words matter. They may reflect reality, but they also have the power to change reality, the power to uplift, and the power to abase. This came from Pulitzer Prize columnist and sort of journalist advocate William Raspberry. So, sort of going into the meat of our discussion, we want to just sort of talk about the actual application process and what brings us to where sort of we are in residency and getting from the medical school to residency. And it's a circle. There are barriers at every single level of entry to medical school and to residency and to fellowship and to attendinghood and to faculty development. But specifically, you know, in medical education, we have barriers to entry. We have MSPEs, we have SLOEs, we have written feedback, and all of these things sort of play into our applications and play into the way that we look on paper when people are looking at us. But before we can even write our names down and submit, we have to overcome hurdles to even get our names down on paper. You know, the ability to get multiple SLOEs in and of itself a bias. SLOEs are expensive. It's not free to go out of state or out of city to go and rotate out a program. In fact, in a lot of ways, it's wildly expensive. To sort of, again, call vulnerability to myself, I didn't grow up in a very financially privileged household, and had I not gone to medical school during a global pandemic where the SLOE programs were largely shut down and we were unable to rotate, I don't know that I can say with confidence that I would even be here holding the mic right now. The same person with the same application and all of the same things that I bring to the table because of a financial barrier. So I challenge all of you, especially people that are reading and screening these applications, to sort of think, is it a red flag for this person to only have 2 SLOEs? Is it a red flag for this person to have more letters from faculty members at their institution, or is there a larger picture here that I'm missing? And then this sort of feeds forward to if people from all of these barriers are being barred from being physicians, we don't have physician representation, we don't have people that look like the populations that they serve, and that feeds into our patient care as well. That gives us implicit biases that we're less capable and able to address because of our foundation is sort of not bringing in the people that can give us the best perspective. So, want to talk about language and written evaluations. You know, there are many people that are faculty members that are probably people that have written a lot of things like this before. But there's a lot of bias in language. Sort of going back to that quote, the things that you write on paper are things that often will dictate people's future in residency, in academia, and in their future careers. And it's not that you can't be honest, but it's something that's really important to think about and to sit with, that every time that you go to write a SLOE, even if it's your 50th one of this interview season, that it's someone's livelihood, you know? If someone is shy and you thought that they didn't come out of their shell, maybe that's something worthwhile to you to mention, but is it worth potentially limiting someone's career options? Were they so shy that you think that they don't deserve interviews, you know? But then sort of going off my soapbox and diving actually deeper into the different types of language biases that they are, one of the most well-studied branch points, because I think it's a lot easier to sort of look at things in binary when it comes to actually making a research project, is the differences between the way that people who identify as male and people who identify as female are described. Men tend to be described with more innate and standout descriptors. Men tend to be given feedback that they are smart and talented, that they are high achieving, versus women are more likely to be described with more abstract concepts. This person is helpful. This person is caring. This person is empathetic. And it's not that these things are mutually exclusive. A lot of the times they're not. And I think a really interesting sort of subset of this is the notion that a lot of these things are things that we look for in emergency medicine residency. And I think it's largely why we tend to be one of the more integrated fields with more equal numbers of men and women. But sort of all of this aside, there was actually a study done out of the University of Illinois, Chicago, after controlling for gender, race, ethnicity, AOA status, type of school, affiliate programs, visiting clerkships, SLOEs, and Step 1 scores. Across the entire board, URIM, underrepresented in medicine students, were systemically ranked lower in almost all categories. And so I was looking at a lot of different things. How can I teach people to sort of address this? And I was looking at a lot of creating writing workshops to sort of help me help guide you. We want to avoid using words and descriptions that apply a homogeneousness of groups, you know? Things like well-dressed, articulate, well-spoken, things that may be really, really meaningless to someone as, if you're describing me as a white person, a person in a position of power and privilege, to someone who doesn't look like me. Like, what does it mean to specifically call someone out to be articulate, and why did you feel the need to say that? And then mentioning only race and discussing only race in applicants who are not white is something, you know, the reason that we say that we racialize as white during our identity explicit introductions is we implicitly other people when we center these conversations around a non-group, rather than including everyone in the holistic discussion. And then being very, very careful about tone policing and bias in your interpretation of the way that people think and present themselves. Like, for example, a lot of the thing that came up was AAVE, African American Vernacular English, as improper or wrong English versus just, you wouldn't say that way about someone who maybe had a Southern accent or someone who was bilingual. And further avoiding language that sort of implies someone's inability to do something or a perceived disability, you know? Carly did really well on her boards despite the fact that she's dyslexic. Little bit of truth to that. Or, I don't think that this person's disability will preclude them from working because I saw them working very hard. Like, just really sit with the things that you're thinking of mentioning and think about the ways that they could potentially hurt someone, even if your intent is to help them. And then always, this goes without saying in this room, but just to say it, respecting gender pronouns in writing. You know, if someone prefers the they series, don't write she, don't write he in their application. Respect them. It starts from the ground up. And then a very brief aside, sort of the way that we use language, I think also, while we're on this topic, and then we'll sort of get back into the meat of the SLOEs in the workshop, we use this in our day-to-day lives too as clinicians. Even if you're not someone who is faculty, if you're not someone who screens application, if you're a fourth-year medical student that's about to sit down and start writing HPIs for the first time in a documented EMR, you know, these are descriptors that I have used and probably have still used and may have used when I was writing notes on Monday on the plane before coming here, because no one is perfect, you know? But how many times have you used the words combative, agitated, uncooperative, poor historian, unkempt, non-compliant? Are these descriptors actually important, or are you making yourself feel better because you didn't get the history that you wanted to from a person? All right, back to SLOEs. I promised the soapbox would be short, and I delivered. So we wanted to sort of hone in on everything about the SLOE. Specifically, the piece that we can address is the one that we're going to try to workshop here today, but it's a larger scale than that, you know? There's as I had mentioned earlier, SLOEs are inequitable. There's financial barriers to even obtain them, and when financial barriers are in place and the number matter and the location that you place matters, that's an inequity, and that affects the people that are submitting these applications. There's an implicit bias in the content of our SLOEs, as we had mentioned. That's an inequity, and that's one that we can work to change and try to develop and improve over time. And also, not to dismantle the establishment as a PGY2, but we invented SLOEs. Other programs don't use them. Other programs don't necessarily require that you do these away rotations to become a really, really good, well-developed, competitive applicant. You know, so is the role of the SLOE as important as we make it? Maybe. But other specialties seem to match people just fine as well. So just a little food for thought. And all of these sort of in combination together can potentially lead to decreased inclusion. All right. So some of my co-facilitators, thank you Caitlin and Melanie for giving me the mic and the voice, even though I'm scared. We have passed out sort of example SLOEs to your tables. We want to, or you can just use your table mates, maybe break off into little subgroups of 2 or 3. We provided 2 SLOEs. Read through them. We'll originally gave 20 minutes, can probably stand to shorten it to about 10 or 15 just for time's sake. I want you to go through them and try to see if you can identify examples of biased language in these SLOEs. You can talk amongst yourselves, you can read them together, and then we'll sort of come through together at the end to debrief and discuss.
Yeah, it's pretty, like, this sort of like, I'm reading this from. Exactly. I need to start it. Yeah. And this one.
You're so painful to read.
They're to read, right? And it's like, it makes me wonder.
That's so exciting. I mean, this is like so clearly about
Oh, 100%, right? They
like,
put
it's
like
like so
aggressive personality. Articulate, right? Articulate, yeah.
Right. So, how are you? We're reviewing terribly problematic SLOEs. Yeah. These are real SLOEs.
Oh. Hi. I'm Sree. I've heard a lot about you. Well, Char's right. So you've got two of my only good things, all good things. It was nice to put a piece of the name.
Yeah, these are super painful too.
And an institution more suited to this person.
Right. Like, what does that even mean?
There's a lot of hidden context behind these things. And both of them seem to come from some place of bias. It's just like when I'm reading it, right, I'm visualizing a person as like a slow. It's like this seems like it's getting how does this one like visualizing how you're feeling
about it until they were like that.
Which is really tricky because like the context of such a like this is that's a super different way of reading it than if the system is they know them and there's like a very diverse
I think I have a very hard time. This one to me, like looking at this slope, it's the first one, but I feel like it would be very easy for me to say this seems like it's like it seems like you're saying all the things about her, she's hardworking, and she was taking leadership now. Right. It's not one type of way, she's like, oh, she's not only she's however, and it just seems like it's all about like how she's willing to try. I wish that conversation would be nervous, right? This one I think is harder because there's also things like this actually is like she's like without as a medical student, I actually go back to the read twice a week here Saturday, and also I spend my week back to now that everyone's first and like often so I think that's when it's
I know everyone is having really, really good discussions amongst themselves right now, but I'm going to sort of have everyone rein it back in. We'll kind of recollect as a group. Okay. So for the sake of time, we're going to recollect and come back to the big group and kind of discuss our individual thoughts and feelings. Okay? So, as we sort of sit through these, I want to sort of, to a lot of you, hopefully, I want some of the things that are phrased in here to feel a little bit appalling. I also want to call attention to, these are sort of worst examples, but a lot of these are cut and pasted from applications that I have read in the last 2 years. So these phrasings, these sentences are things that somewhere, in some way, shape, or form, a person in a position of power has written down about an applicant. And I like to think that a lot of the people in here are doing a lot of work to, you know, focus in on themselves and try to avoid doing things like this that could accidentally or intentionally harm someone, but just sort of as a general reminder that everyone is susceptible to bias and everyone is susceptible to making mistakes like this, which is why it's so important. And we're so thankful that all of you came here today to help try to sort of learn about that. So I want to open up the floor to all of you. If anyone, I can pass the mic around. Anyone have thoughts? What did you find? What were some of the examples? What did you learn?
So for the first SLOE, I think what was interesting was that every positive attribute was sort of backhanded by something else. And there was a lot of focus on how passive this person is, and I'm not surprised that it was about a woman, because it's like I was reading it, right, and I'm visualizing the applicant that they're talking about, and I'm thinking about someone who maybe she may have traveled to a different hospital in a different state. It's a new place. I remember being an MS4 many years ago and being kind of just like, I want to be careful about like how I come off. I don't want to come on too strong. So it seems like, she's like a hard worker. She's a team player. She's picking up patients. She's spending time with her patients. I don't understand why there's so much like appears teachable and what was it? Initially shy, which I don't, it was just like a little bit surprising that there was so much focus on her being proactive and independent, whereas in the second SLOE, you look at this person who maybe was proactive and independent and was trying to, kind of assert himself as like, okay, I know what I'm talking about, and then he was called headstrong and articulate, and then aggressive, which also painted a picture in my mind of like, I was like, I feel like you're talking about a Black medical student, because it just feels biased. And like some of the things that I'm reading, I feel like I've read in the literature, and also I've heard like biased people talk about Black people that way. I think what was a little confusing was I think when they put in something objective, right? So they're calling many attendings by their first name. I'd like to know, is this an institutional thing? Is he the only person being singled out for calling attendings by their first name? I personally don't like it when medical students call me by my first name, but that has, right, I think that's just the culture that I was trained in, right? Yeah, or at least like wait until I say, okay, you can call me Smruti. But there's just a lot of different things to pick apart, and I feel like I can't objectively go by this SLOE. I can't say that, I'm not going to take this medical student. I'd like to meet the student to get a better understanding of who they are, because this is just not giving me a proper objective understanding.
Thank you. We touched a lot on those points, and like some of the lines on, like she spent a longer amount of time with patients in a room gathering history. Like we questioned, like what if she hadn't? Like would she have gotten the comment of like this student had to go back to the room multiple times because they didn't get a full history, and like things like we wanted her to be more assertive and independent. If she hadn't, like if she had been too assertive and independent, like would they have been like, this student showed no humility? Like it's kind of like going back to like the Barbie monologue of like what an ideal woman is, and like this like, or an ideal emergency medicine candidate. Like as a student, you're stepping in and you don't know where you want to, where in this barometer that, and the hidden curriculum, like you need to stand in. And so we talked a lot about that.
Yeah, we were also talking, I think like the important thing, because we can identify this, is also I like to pause and think like, how would I reward this if I saw that, right? It's kind of the challenging part, because I think I appreciate that now in our culture we're trained to at least identify biased language, microaggressions, and things that we might not have talked about even like 10 years ago, right? So there is growth in that space, but still growth to happen, but also just like how would we reward some of this to make it objective? For example, the whole like picking up patients. It would be different if someone said like picks up only 1 to 2 patients versus on average the other students are seeing 5, right? Then that's objective. It's not biased language, but it just kind of shows. But then it also makes me think about like what are we doing to set our students up for success, right? How are we having an orientation that actually tells them this is our expectations? For example, we only address all the attendings by their last names, right? That's our culture here. So sharing like institutional culture, sharing expectations very clearly. And then I like to, actually, I give my students, I call it like the throwaway shift or the coaching shift, right? For my sub-Is, I was like, we're gonna work together. I pull out the yellow form and I was like, this is what honors looks like, and I'm gonna tell you what each of our residents and attendings who are gonna fill this out, what they're looking for to get that column. And I'm not gonna fill one of these out for the shift at all, but instead, I'm gonna coach you the whole shift and give you feedback, and then on our next shift, show up with your A game. Right, because now I've set you up for success, and let's see what you can do. And then I can at least objectively know they're on the same foundation. So just be thoughtful about, like, with your teams that are doing the sub-Is and stuff, getting everyone on the same page when they come, orienting them, especially new students, into your environment, getting everyone to know where the bathrooms are, where the patients' rooms are, all these kind of like simple humanistic things, just so that they can be ready for their shift to actually show up and then get a true evaluation instead of just like tiptoeing and not feeling included, which is our whole series here, is not feeling included, and then it's showing on their SLOEs for the wrong reason.
I know these SLOEs are cringeworthy, and I've read plenty as well, but I would argue that in some ways this is actually an argument for SLOEs, because have you read any of the letters that get from non-academic programs? They're a disaster, and they're not helpful, right? And at least we have a contained group of people that we can educate about this type of thing. Whereas if you say any emergency department, any emergency physician can write a letter, the information I'm going to get, A, they don't know what a residency program requires, and B, the biased language, sometimes very pro and hype them up and not helpful at all for us. I think in some ways, like I said, this is almost an argument for SLOEs. Let's fix the people who are doing them and fix the readers, right? Teach the readers how to deal with it appropriately, rather than saying any person can do it, because let's be honest, people outside of the academic world are not as interested in fixing their biases as we are.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful context as well, is to think about like how having SLOEs actually does potentially define the group of people who we can work with in a more helpful way. I think the context of the institution from which SLOEs emerge is also really helpful to consider as we're reading them, right? Because I think as we're reading this first example, I think we all sort of feel like, okay, well, maybe she's just shy, or she's not feeling included or helpful. Like, I think you could sort of wrap your head around like, oh, maybe we should, we should bring this person in to see what they're like, or give them the benefit of the doubt. The second SLOE, I think, is a little bit more challenging, right? And we were having a conversation about how, if somebody is going so far as to write something like any one of these sentences, like these are all red flag sentences. And so that, like, for me, reads like they have serious concerns about this person's ability to do their job. And if this is coming from an institution where this is the only black student who has rotated through their department in a decade among all white faculty, I'm gonna read this really differently than if they are coming from, like, I don't know, like Cook County or Kings, like any of the institutions where we have a much more diverse group of students and residents, right? That's going to read super differently depending on the context of the institution, because if they're getting a letter like this from Bellevue, like that's very, very different. And so I think that's another helpful piece for us. Not that any of these things are not problematic, that's too many negatives, but like many of these things remain problematic, but the context is also, I think, helpful in as much as we want to create letters that are still useful to each other, right, as we are trying to make decisions about who to invite for interview.
I think there's also a huge statement. I don't know if anyone else does this, but when you look at SLOEs, whether you see if it's at a group, was it written by a group or was it written by a single person? I think it really kind of speaks to the need to actually have a group, and that like letters really should be written, like we actually have a SLOE day where we actually write all the letters together as a group, and then at least have one or two other people read them over, so that like you can sort of say, hey, this might be a doubt raiser. And it also makes sure that we are standardized in our language for all of the, like we use the same final conclusion sentence for everybody, essentially where we sort of put them, as we're kind of saying where we would put them on their, like when we are kind of like ranking them against each other. It allows us to be really clear with the language that we're using, standardized with the language, and also call each other out of like, hey, that doesn't read quite right.
Because when you're writing multiple ones, I don't know that you always think about how, like, you're not writing it as the reader. And so when you have back and forth.
Yeah, so self-disclosure, I'm a recovering PD. And knowing now what I know as a VC writing a lot of promotion letters, I cringe at what I wrote for SLOEs for a long time. I think context has been brought up is really critical, right? I would never consider writing a promotion letter without starting a sentence with something like, this is my current role, this is how I know this individual. And even if it's an arm's length, I say all my comments are based on only the material I have in front of me, a CV or whatever, right? With a SLOE, I would love to say, if it's a committee one, right? We know those are in some ways better, less biased, but also, something about, like we said, the shop, we're a high volume, inner city, urban, setting. This is what we expect of our students and residents. The typical residencies or student has this many patients, they do 10 shifts in 3 weeks or whatever, something to set the stage. And then even if they make some of these more biased comments, it at least gives me some idea of what the context is they're saying it from. Just reading that, I ended up with way more questions than answers from these. They didn't help me in any way. And I think if they had framed it, and even if it says it's a group, like you said, I think having a final conclusion sentence that is standardized, that all of us, if we read these, we all say, oh, I got 3 from University of Washington. Let me see what they all say at the very end, because that helps me standardize or stratify.
Thank you so much. We will go ahead and move forward for the sake of time, but I want to thank you all for your very, very thoughtful participation in the reading and discussion. I think we'll leave with just a few closing remarks. One is that remembering that every time we read and every time we write and every time that we interpret a SLOE, we are viewing it as a person in power from someone who inherently does not have power. Medical students are a vulnerable group. They're always a vulnerable group. There's not a lot of ways to win as a med student. You're too loud, you're too quiet, you're too soft-spoken, you're too aggressive, you're too assertive, you saw too many, you didn't see enough, you were sloppy, you were too careful. You can't win. And take all those things into account when you read and when you write. And remembering that the things that you say, while they may be very, very important to you and may be a positive attribute to you, may not mean the same thing to a person that's reading them. Calm, quiet, maybe things that are good to you in a crazy and chaotic environment to have someone who is steady and steadfast. It may be a negative at another place who's looking for high energy residents. So a lot of the hopeful takeaways from this are just sort of making yourself aware of what could exist and integrating that into your future reading and writing practices. Thank you all.
We're going to take like a 10-minute break, if that sounds good, because we know like DEI work is relational work, so we need to know each other and be there for each other. So take about a 10-minute break. If you need bathrooms, are down the hall to the left. The password for the internet is annual meeting with a capital A and a capital M. But we'll see you back in 10 minutes.
It's like the technically it's not UVM, but it's on the conference. So if you I'll send you the invite in case there's anybody else who might be interested. Yes. Yeah, we've got there's some folks here who will add to the list. Oh yeah, if you see me pulling, I've like gone there. Did you do the whole digital thing? Oh my gosh, that'd be awesome. Yeah, we haven't done it yet with ours. They're still a little That would be great.
She was my AP. She's
I check it out on the library, and then if I like it, I buy it. If I don't, I just buy it. It's so much waste because
Yeah, she is.
yes,
I have to read something else. You do. It's so cool though. It really is. I'm actually just doing it again.
I'm from IU, so I'm doing my whole one in June. Oh, nice, Midwest, yeah, that's what's up. But I'm doing my whole one in June, and then I'm doing my way as I go in Boston. Yeah. So I don't know, I'm nervous, and when I was reading over that SLOE, I feel like I fall into more like a first student, where like I'm definitely a confident personality, like we have those programs or like presenting and things like that. But I think in the way of like being more like assessments or like authorities, I have some difficulty maintaining that confidence. That's what I wanted to do. And I worry about not coming out. Yeah. So I haven't had any like advice on that. I think that's what's really important. I do. Yeah. Oh, no, yeah. Yeah. Would you go? Are you a resident here? I'm at BM. Oh, okay, nice. Oh, nice. Yeah. We have to meet up with residents to talk about it. But I feel like that's kind of what it's like. Listening to my presentation, then I'll start to do things like that. Yeah. That's exactly That's helpful, actually. Yeah, like kind of changing that perspective of I'm not coming in as I am not now. I want to be this opportunity. It's like using this opportunity. The in-person on the rounds, it's like a secret. Yes, yeah. I would avoid going to the bathroom on the rounds, and after for 3 hours. I just have to use it. Yeah. Yeah. Right, exactly. No, truly. That's really Exactly, and that's fun. I can't wait.
Hey guys, we're going to gather back together. Okay, so hey guys, we're going to, if you guys want to grab your seats, we'll kind of just, we'll grab a second. Okay. Okay, so we're going to join the second half of our kind of workshop here. I think the beautiful part, that's why we let this run a little bit longer for the break, is just I think the networking, the relationships we build, this is really what can transform the way that we approach diversity efforts and stuff too. So definitely don't let these conversations stop here in the room. Definitely get each other's numbers and connections and stuff too, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done in this space. And like you might have heard before, this is not going to be lifted on one person's shoulders, right? This is what we all have to carry together in order to actually see a impactful change. And the other thing that I've been trying to be, practice self-compassion, which I've learned from my good friend, LA, is that we have to be patient with this, right? That a lot of the cultures that we see, they were not created in one day, so it will also take time to see that change. So we talked a little bit now, just as a debrief, about how we see bias in the different environments. We've seen it in our SLOEs. I also say that translates to how we do feedback for our residents. So just be thoughtful as you're giving your end of shift evaluations or the milestone evaluations. When we're writing our feedback, we might actually be the ones writing some of that biased language there. So just being very thoughtful about that. So now we're going to shift over to the clinical realm, which is where we spend a lot of our time. And we see a lot of these biases pop up. We may actually be the cause of some of that and perpetuating that as well too. So we want to talk about like DEI and medical education, but really how do you be an upstander within and beyond the walls of the ED itself? And we have no disclosure except it will be an uncomfortable growing space for all of us to be in, as we actually will teach you some different strategies on how to be an upstander and actually call you into that space and invite you into that space to actually practice that as well too. And we'll talk a little bit more, but just to plant that seed. The other thing is that a lot of this work has been done just in a collaboration. So while me and my co-facilitators will be sharing this information, we definitely want to acknowledge all of those who've actually done done the hard work and the research and understanding this and giving us those frameworks that we'll be sharing with you today. So by the end of the session, we really hope that you'll be able to kind of understand. Well, I'll just do a quick little foundation so we're all on the same page about some of the terminology and how diversity is affected. But really, it's going to be how do you create an inclusive space and how do you address those microaggressions and macroaggressions and avert racism that might pop up in the clinical space to actually address them in a productive way so that you can make this inclusive space that we need for our learners and ourselves and our patients. And then also just how do you address mistreatment as well. So why does it matter? You know, this is what we've been talking about the whole time. So I think I won't belabor the point, but there's so much literature out there, and it's kind of a sad and sometimes frustrating space to be in right now, just with all the challenges to our DEI work itself. And in some places, you can't even say this word, right? Because you might lose your job, and people have lost their positions as directors of DEI and stuff. So the struggle is real outside of these walls, but I'll definitely say that sharing the data helps, right? That we know that our patient outcomes are better when we have diverse workforce. We know the conversations that we have, cultural humility, cultural competency is improved when we have a diverse workforce. And our patients do much better, right? And that's why we came into the spaces to have our patients do better. So diversity matters, and despite the kind of challenges you may feel outside of these walls, what you do matters in this space itself. So just a little encouragement to keep fighting the fight. You're not fighting it alone. We're all together in this, and we will make a change. We'll make a difference. It'll just take a little bit of time to get everyone on the same page for that. They've done a survey of the 20 top ACGME specialties, and they actually found that none of us have the same representation as our patient populations. So if you're feeling like, oh, we're so far away, don't worry, it's all of us that are there. So at least we're acknowledging that there's a road that we need to travel, and we all need to do this together. So not just EM itself, but all the specialties. So hopefully that's encouragement. I think it's also important to recognize that the system is based on racism itself, and even though that's hard to say, and sometimes when people hear the R word, right, they don't want to hear that. They don't want us to say that word. I think it's just understanding that within ourselves, internalized all the way up through the systems that we work with, there are biases, there are racism that exists, and this is why it can be so challenging for our patients, for ourselves, for our students and learners to really find themselves and find the inclusion in that space. And this is where we see a lot of assimilation happening. People just kind of denying who they are is because they feel like they won't belong there. And so as we talk about just microaggressions and just being an upstander, we also just want to share there's not one right way to do this. There's not one standard language, just because we all have our own unique backgrounds. We have our own unique way of seeing our patients. You can imagine the way we all practice EM, if we give you the same patient scenario, you'll all have your own workups, your own way of getting the history, your own way of even communicating to the patient about their results itself. So in that same uniqueness that you have for your patient encounters, similarly, as you're addressing microaggressions and macroaggressions, you need to find your own voice, what's authentic to yourself as you're going to address that. And we'll have a couple different frameworks that we'll share with you just so that you can do that. But if you look in the literature, there are so many. As we're trying to distill down, my team and I, which ones should we actually do, we're just there's too many to actually do this. And so we gave you the ones that are the most commonly used and probably the most easily to apply as well too for that. And the other thing that I always like to think about as I'm in this space, because it can get frustrating, I'll say it can be really challenging, especially when you start thinking about the disparities that exist, especially for our patients, but even our learners itself, is that there's such a long road to go to. But this framework here was really helpful for me to identify when I'm talking to my patients or whoever is the perpetrator, if you will, of this, where are they at on this zone of becoming an anti-racist, right? Are they in that fear zone where they don't actually acknowledge that it even exists, or are they all the way in the growth zone of saying how can I be better with this? And what I think about, once I can identify based on some of these language that I identify, that they're at, I can take them by the hand and gently invite them in to walk with me all the way to the growth zone itself. And that may not happen in one encounter. I can guarantee it will not happen in one encounter, but at least it helps to shed the light that this is happening. And it can also help you to just realize that there is a road ahead that you have to help this person go. But planting seeds in their minds of issues that are popping up can really help them to grow as well too. And so as we kind of go through the workshop itself, I want you to think about what's in your locus of control. I think all of us want to say, like, we want to dismantle racism and, make everything inclusive, bridge these disparities that exist for our patients, and we do, and we will. But right now, within our locus of control, we do actually control that clinical environment that we step into. We control our teams, and we collaborate with our teams to make it a space that can be safe. And so that is in our locus of control. So when you step into your shift, just be thoughtful about, like, how can you actually set up expectations for your team? How can you correct, behavior that may or may not be aligned with the mission of your team itself? And this is really where you can find your voice. So this is where we'll invite you into being an upstander. So we know bystanders are the ones who actually bear witness to things happening. And it's not to say that that's bad, that's important, is to actually acknowledge that something is happening. That is the first step of change, is actually acknowledging that something needs to be changed. An upstander is now asking for the next step, which is stepping up and finding your voice. And it doesn't have to be verbally. It can even be nonverbal cues that can actually say, this is not okay. This is not the way it should be, and something needs to change. So it actually is just shining light on the situation that's there. And so we're going to do a series of 3 different role-playing scenarios. Each of my co-facilitators will teach you a tactic or strategy, and then we'll actually go into groups of 3, which you guys are very familiar with, so you can stay in those groups if you wanted to, because you probably have psychological safety in those groups. So if you want to find your teammates, that might be the best way of doing this. But we have 3 different roles that you'll go into, and you'll actually change for each scenario, okay? Just so that by the end of this workshop, you'll be able to be the upstander and practice that response in it, just because that's the most important thing. Because we really find that in our minds, we can think of the perfect thing to say and be able to fix it, but when the time comes, it is really hard to be able to, and one, even to acknowledge that it happened. Sometimes this is 2 days later, we're like, oh man, I should have said something, and then we carry that around for the next 2 years instead. And that is not helpful, right? So instead, I think it's important to, one, have self-compassion. It's okay. If you didn't acknowledge it, even 2 days later, that is great. Great job that you acknowledged that even happened. That is growth. But then later on, the idea is that when you're in that situation in real time, you can actually say something or teach your teams about it, educate everyone that this is happening as well. So with that, I'll hand it off to Smruti to kind of share our first one.
All of my best comebacks are in the shower, so. Every time. So we want to start out with source control because we're talking a lot about being an upstander, being an excellent ally. And, we're all here because we want to make some changes to our culture and our institutions. We want to educate each other, right? I want to hit the nail on the head with if you're the source of a microaggression, right? What do you do? Emily talked earlier about this fight or flight response that you get, right? When there's a threat to your safety, to your dignity. And then to your sense of belonging, right? So any barriers to say, you're a source of a microaggression, someone calls you out, anything that would prevent you from being able to effectively course correct? Just any ideas?
You immediately get defensive.
Immediately get defensive, right? It's like just human nature. Nobody wants to be wrong. Nobody wants to be at fault. Anything else?
So you're the one who's being called out.
Right, yeah. So say, right?
You said something problematic. Got it.
Yeah. Embarrassment, exactly.
Like a visceral response, you tighten up, get really hot. Yeah, don't know what to say.
Exactly, and yeah, Ernesto?
There not being a culture where calling out or calling in is like an expectation or normative.
Exactly, right? So it's like making mistakes is such a big deal that you performed a microaggression, you become defensive, you're like, oh my God, everyone's gonna think I'm racist, but I'm not, right? And you just miss the point, you don't get to address your own implicit bias. And I think particularly if you're a minority, right, especially if you're a well-represented minority in medicine like myself, you're even more embarrassed. You're like, oh, I should know more about this, and now I just made this mistake. So some of the things you guys already talked about, but yeah, it's just there's this barricade of like, I think I know what I'm talking about, and now this person thinks that I'm an idiot, and how do I come back from this? And I think that one of the most important things is to create a culture where making mistakes is okay. Being called in as opposed to being called out is okay. And how do you sort of like dysregulate that emotional response so that you can actually make it about the other person and not about yourself, right? And also this is the assist method for sources. We found this in the MedEd portal literature, but it's kind of a little bit of a guide for what to include in what you say. I think that it's very hard to come up with something right away in the moment, right? The first thing that comes out of your mouth is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. what does that do? What does "I'm sorry, I didn't mean it" come to? It's dismissive, yeah.
I think it's centered on fixing your own sensation of "I messed up," as opposed to like "I'm so sorry for impacting you in this way," and wanting to make yourself feel right as opposed to like heal together.
That's perfect, right? So your focus ends up being on your intent and not the impact on the other person. So I think first thing to do is, Emily was talking about like maybe take a box breath for a second, right? And be like, this actually is not about me. I need to make this about this other person and the impact my words had on them, right? Or my behavior. I think it's really important to sort of, tailor your discussion to what the recipient also needs in that moment, right? The recipient might be like, look, you said this, it's really obnoxious. I need to get back to work. So maybe take a second, think about like, all right, is it okay if I can come and talk to you about this later? I really want to make things right. Or if they're just like, hey, it's not a big deal. I get called nurse all the time, or I get misgendered all the time. I just need you to understand what it is, and you can say like, I'm sorry, this is my mistake. This is something I need to work on, and I will do better, right? But if it's something a little bit bigger, and the recipient is like, you can tell that they're really being affected by this, they want to talk about it a little bit more. I think it's really important to make sure that you also acknowledge your own bias, right? I think that especially, I work in Brooklyn. We have so many different kinds of people that everyone can be a microaggressor at any point, right? Literally at any point. And I myself have been a microaggressor in the past, and I've just been like, I'm really sorry. I actually know nothing about this situation, and I'm going to make sure that I learn about this, and I will not do this again. And I hope that I can do better. So with that said, right, I just want you to think about these little points in what you want to say in your spiel, right? You can say that I'm really sorry I hurt you, not like I'm sorry I hurt you, like I'm sorry my words hurt you, just I'm sorry that I hurt you. And thank them for your time, and make sure that you seek some feedback if they're in the right space. It also shouldn't be their burden to like teach you how to be better. If they're open to it, you can say something along the lines of like, if you could just point me to the right resources, I will go ahead and learn on my own. So with this in mind, we have a little bit of a role play scenario. So everybody, you can have your groups of 3. There are 3 roles in this case. And I want you to think about, those of you who are going to be playing the source of the microaggression, just think about what emotions are you feeling right away, right? What impact your words have on the other person. And how can you individually, right, if you are the microaggressor, what strategies can you take into account to kind of like calm down, take that defensiveness away, and be able to effectively communicate using the framework we just talked about? Just take 2 minutes to look at the scenario, and then.
Do we get to be together? Yeah. Yeah.
That's so sweet. I figured.
Like, because that's like, for like one ideas and you're like, working on or like you send an answer or whatever, like my script I'll be so helpful to me because I don't have to, in those first few seconds, I don't have to think about what to say because my response can just be, oh my gosh, thank you so much for using my attention. So I just have a second to think about that. And that's like, no matter what somebody tells me whether it's like the microaggressions that they I took an intro, I said a trauma bay that was problematic or something, whatever it is, like just knowing that I have that.
Yeah, thanks for coming down. Mr. Smith is a 73-year-old who has a history of peripheral vascular disease. He came into the right like 8 or 12 hours is what it's dusty. There's no pulse on palpation or Doppler. No ABS in my floor. We started him on heparin and half triathlon was ready. His CTA coming in. I think.
Yeah, oh, so you're going to get with that.
I'm sure this is the overall.
like, just like, oh no, I'm like the director for equity initiatives. Like, stop again.
I was also talking to the nurses about sorry. That was you? That would be Dr. Patel. Make sure to call that my nurses call upstairs. So essentially, I guess this scenario is such that you are realizing that somebody at that moment, like he didn't call me. But I just was on the other side of that. I'm really sorry. Yes. It's like, I'll charge your patient. Here's my just if you wouldn't mind staying patient, but I remember feeling, oh, that's one thing,
Yeah.
And totally came from a place of
Right. Yeah. No, and like, and modeling that is really helpful. I've used, especially about residents, that's not a big about just but I'm being in this area.
What is your daughter think about that?
In the midst of that resuscitation, as we were like trying to set them up, keep going to like college. One of the things that we said in the room was like, he's a young kid who doesn't even have any gang tattoos, let's keep going. Yes. And like that one of the nurses put me aside afterwards, and like she's like, oh no, you said a thing, and like didn't land well, and talked to my back, and I was like, it's obviously the implication would be like if you had gang tattoos, like just call it or something, deserved it or something. And it was a moment where I was so comfortable that I had in my head somewhere that script of like, thank you for telling me I said this thing. And I think, and maybe this is something that happens to me every day where I was there, but like, when somebody tells you you've done something wrong, it's really helpful for me to recognize like I'm probably saying things wrong all the time, and most of the time nobody's saying anything to me. And so it really is an honor and reflection of your trust and relationship with that person. They felt like they could say something that they exactly that's like really helpful.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think that like that's why I was like saying thank you is like part of that.
No, I think that's and like if you start like Can I plug one event that's coming up at the very end? Is that okay? I'm going to drop a slide. It's a live presentation, so I can. Well, it's not down. Oh, is it downloaded? Okay, never mind. That's good. No, I actually thought it was.
So 1 minute and then we'll debrief, okay?
But it's such a good reflection of your trust and thinking that you're
Okay.
Okay, so how did that go? All right, let's debrief this as a group. So, all right, let's come back. All right, how did that go overall? Any like immediate reactions that came out? I never know how to bring everyone's attention back.
Hey guys, we're gonna gather back together.
Go to the source. All right, let's gather around. Okay, so any immediate reactions that came out, like for you as a source, Stacey?
So our group was talking about how this scenario happens all the time, and I think everybody in the group has experienced this from both the person that's being misrolled and from the source perspective. At least in our group, that's what we shared, and we also talked about like strategies for. Like mitigation, pre-mitigation sort of, right? Like wearing a white coat in the emergency room or like wearing business clothes as opposed to wearing scrubs, and like how those strategies are interesting because they differentiate you from other people, but at the same time, can contribute to other problematic things like having to overcome a bias that, we should be working to minimize, and, having to be part of the hierarchy that we're trying to break down. And so that was just some interesting stuff that came out of the conversation in our group.
Right, it's like about shifting the focus from like what can you do as a recipient of microaggressions to like how can we be a little bit more cognizant of our own biases, right, in the ED.
I think one of the interesting things I noticed kind of after the fact is that while Dr. Patel introduced himself, Dr. Gonzalez didn't introduce herself, and I give a really hard time to the residents who come down. They'll be like, blah, 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 and start talking, but like, I haven't met you before. I'm Dr. Stamen. Who are you, right? So who are you giving me? And Doug mentioned that whenever he meets somebody who's like, hey, I don't think I've met you before, I'm Doug Char, and kind of what's your role? So I think there could have been a pre-mitigation, like you mentioned, of if you started by introducing yourself and then they blatantly ignored it, that's a whole nother situation, right? So.
That's a fair point. I kind of I purposely left it out. Partly is just like she's literally providing this entire handoff and saying that she ordered a CTA and put this patient on a heparin drip, and he's like, so what's pending? But anything that came up sort of like, those of you who played the source, right? How did you regulate that like, oh, I messed up, I did bad, now what do I do? Did anyone struggle with that?
I will share that as an observer, I was watching the, oh crap, like, so I screwed up? So like trying to like clarify roles, and I actually shared that like, I've done this, and I've done this many times to the point that I've done it when the other person was very kind, and it's like, you know what happens, let's move on, versus the other side would be like indignant, angry. And at the end of it, what I struggled the most is remembering the assist, and like, we were trying to figure out like, is this the right moment to ask feedback? Like, they're clearly pissed off, right? Like, so those questions I think are very real, and so for me, as somebody who's done this, and I know that it'll happen again, I just fall back on the curiosity part of, clearly I totally screwed up. I have no problem. I'm like totally screwed up. I'm sorry. And I usually just pause without a lot more explanation, because I just need to, the curiosity part is not necessarily, how are you feeling? But actually just like figuring out the context. So are they pissed? Are they not pissed? Like, there's a conversation about, well, nobody said anything, so maybe like they were not pissed. I was like, I'm pretty sure they're very pissed. Like, and then that is actually for me a good opportunity later on to pull them aside and say like, thank you, you were very graceful for not calling me out, but I feel like shit, and I just want to acknowledge that I did something, and I'm very sorry.
Yeah, I think that's excellent, right? And what you said also about like taking a pause for a second, right? It's totally fine to say, I'm really sorry. Do you mind if I just take a minute to process what just happened, so that I can get my thoughts together, right? Or just say, do you mind if I'm so sorry. Can I take a minute to just think about this? I think that that allows them to also sort of calm down, is sort of like regulate their own adrenaline as well. And I think also saying thank you, because I think it's really hard if you are the recipient of a microaggression to, in the middle of your clinical shift, go up and be like, hey, you did this, and it was really awful. The fact that they feel comfortable enough, or that's what Emily was saying, the fact that they feel comfortable enough to come to you and they're telling you this, I think that you should thank them for their courage. Also, just saying, thank you so much for taking the time and the energy to come and talk to me about this. This is really something that I need to be working on. I appreciate you for bringing this to my attention. It really kind of helps to, it helps to regulate you too, right? And I think you just automatically, I don't know, I'm an empath. You kind of get to this point where you're like, okay, I already feel like I want to be better to you, and they might actually see that through you, right? Anyone that's like really struggled with the like, oh my God, I froze, I don't know what to do. Nobody. It's a very, very, yeah.
I feel like, and this scenario has happened to me, like as the sort of the invisible one in the room, right? That has happened to me. But I find that it's pretty commonly, like, at least when it's happened, it's like the person who is the microaggressor sort of freezes, and then there's a moment, and the moment passes, and they're like, let's just pretend that didn't happen. Yeah. Yes. Like, I find that that's actually a very common reaction that happens. And the moment, it's like there is a moment, but it passes, and then it somehow gets even more awkward.
Yeah. And that can get addressed a couple of different ways. I think that is often the default, where like people realize they've done something, they're like, oh no, I'm gonna walk away. I think two pieces. I find it really helpful to have a script for myself when somebody raises something for me, and like because people know me in my institution, they know that I won't like lose my mind and be like, I didn't mean it that way. People tell me things all the time, which is great most of the time. Having that script of like, wow, thank you for telling me this. I just need a moment to collect my thoughts. Just completely takes away my sense of like defensiveness. And I know that I have that to like when somebody raises something problematic, whether it's like that happened over there and I didn't say anything because I didn't realize it. When one of the residents comes and they're like, hey, this thing happened and you were right there and you didn't say anything. My response is the same. It's like, thank you so much for telling me that. I need a minute to think about it. And then I can pause and reflect and like get out of that like brain on fire space, right? And like regulate myself. And when you thank somebody, it also disarms them, right? Because you're like, thank you so much for telling me this. Like, it makes it harder to stay angry. So I think that's also a really effective way of like bringing down the sort of volume in the room.
And also, like, if you're training your faculty on these subjects, right? Like, kind of keeping that focus on like, use apology as a learning tool. It's not a blaming tool, right? You're not the worst person in the world because you committed microaggression. You need to learn from it, right? Like, as long as you learn from it, you commit to being better. And then just kind of the last point was just that I forgot the last point. Tiffany, would you something?
I think for me, like as someone who's been on the receiving end of this and on the opposite side, like misidentifying, who I'm talking to, I think for me it helps just kind of always assume good intent. Like at the end of the day, like even if I know, I'm like, I know exactly, I know why you assumed, but I kind of default to, there's a lot of folks in the room, nobody introduced themselves, like, you know what I mean? I'm just kind of like, so I just kind of default to that to kind of take the emotionality out of it, and I really just kind of like, just, and I think it's a good point, like the person, Dr. Gonzalez didn't introduce themselves. You didn't say, I'm Dr. Gonzalez, and it's like, and I know as a Black attendant who usually has her hair in an afro and looks, younger than whoever, the first thing I say whenever I walk into a room is, I'm Dr. Next week it's like a full, like, yeah, he gets top marks for me.
I think Nicole and Stacey are going to talk a little bit about, Nicole and Stacey are going to talk about upstandership and allyship. But just remember, you also can bring this up, right? If you find yourself as a source of a microaggression and you do this thing where you're like, that Emily was talking about, you're like, oh crap, I messed up. You can come back to it. You can finish up your shift and be like, hey, I want to talk to you about this thing I said. I know you didn't bring it up, but I just wanted to apologize. I thought about it and I realized how wrong I was. That is also, there's never anything wrong with saying I'm sorry, right? Even if you don't say it right away.
I know, I was gonna say they're not fine. Did anyone else read this? Because I kept hearing all these little clues already in like the upstandership where I was like, I don't think this person feels bad at all. Yeah. And so like as I was role playing the microaggressor and I'm like I didn't feel bad because I was embodying that person because I was like, oh, I just want to know if anybody else had that feeling because I saw that upstandership and I was like, oh, I don't think this person feels bad even a little bit. And that was just my interpretation because I kept seeing those little like, hey, there are all these little like, so I started feeling triggered where I was like, oh, you're
like role play this piece. Sorry, now you've been called in as a source and now you have to figure out what you're going to do in that 1 minute. Which, sorry, it was not very clear.
One thing that I would add though, and oftentimes this is missed, is that for those of us who may not be good with confrontation and will go on the side and say like, hey, I'm actually very sorry, I did this. What's also important is circle back with that student because that's probably the most important part there. Because the attending, we're used to this. Like it actually happens a lot more, but it's a lot more formative for that med student who watched this, saw something, called out something, did not get an acknowledgement, and then they just moved on because then this becomes that hidden curriculum that this must be medicine now, and that's hard. And I think that's where we can truly make a difference in this situation.
So going after the student to say, I know you didn't get a response, but thank you very much for doing that. Please.
This is what I did. Do that again. Thank you, and I'm sorry.
And we're going to talk about that after we teach you the next framework, just so we can, but this is a great seed to kind of preview the next one that we're going to do.
Yeah, so I actually think this is absolutely a perfect segue into our next point, which is, as we're talking about this medical student, is what happens when you're not necessarily the person on the receiving or the performing end, but you're witnessing this happen. I think that it's important to acknowledge that in every space that we enter, we fall on some level of a hierarchy where we hold positions of power and privilege, and we also do not have positions of power and privilege, but depending on who's in the room. And so, for example, this medical student, even though they're a medical student, they may be on a lower position of power with the resident and attending who is in the room, but because it's a male medical student who is now being addressed as what was presumed to be the attending, there is that higher level of privilege there. And so there are various levels, and kind of keeping in mind when you're stepping into a space where you fall in that context, I think is really important. And is one, so the LIFT method is the next point that we're going to talk about. If you haven't heard about that, it's another acronym. I personally don't do very good with acronyms. I don't think in the moment of this happening, I'm going to remember the exact, what everything stands for, but we're gonna go through that. And I think the really important part of this role playing is, as Emily said, having scripts, having prepared phrases that you can utilize in these moments, that you don't have to think about what this acronym stands for, but you have those sort of mental checks that you've already rehearsed, you've already said out loud, and so you've taken away a barrier for being an upstander. And so the first is the L, lights on, making the invisible visible. So when you witness something, you can pause. You can say, oh, I hear you saying that, or I see that you're addressing me as what I'm assuming you're, think I'm the attending. This is actually my attending here. So she can answer more of these questions. The I, impact versus intent. We had someone in the back bring up sort of trying to maybe give the benefit of the doubt in that we are all coming into a space not intending to cause harm, but that our words and our actions can inflict harm in various ways. And so recognizing, when someone says a joke that has been not politically correct. It's not, it's definitely should not be said anymore. You can say, oh, I think you meant to be funny when you said, that I'm acting like a girl or I'm running like a girl, but this is not actually how it's coming off. Full stop. So this is where, someone might have gone way too far. They've made maybe some more offensive comment or something that's just overtly we need to actually just stop this conversation now and acknowledge what just happened. This is a point where you should really not continue the conversation until this point has been addressed, because by continuing it, it's going to definitely cause more harm. And then teach. So I think this is the part for me that I think the scripts and sort of having some general idea of points to come up with during bad scenarios can be really helpful, because as we've discussed multiple times, we're emotional. We come into spaces, we get that brain on fire sensation. It's hard to come back from that defensive state. But if you can use something to, humanize yourself also in that scenario where you say I had similar thoughts, or I know a lot of people who think like that, but here's, this data point, or here's another example of why that is not okay anymore, or why this is actually, ill-intended, and these are the effects of that. And so the next scenario is we're gonna role play an incident that I did witness last year as an intern. And so we'll do a similar scenario. I think we had a fourth medical student as an observer if there was 4 people in a group, but we actually had, I think we only have 3 in every group, so that's great. So same thing, scan the QR code. Each of you can, maybe if you were the observer the last time or more of a passive role, you can try to be more of an active role. I think another thing in these spaces is a lot of times there are some people who are always really engaged and who kind of take up a lot of space. So, and then other people who are more reserved. So we're, getting through our session, maybe we can try to switch that up just to kind of give some people who might not have spoken up before some time to do that. So I'll let you guys read the scenarios and we'll come back and debrief.
So we'll probably, I can walk around and show you.
Okay, we're gonna start to bring it back now, so maybe folks can wrap up their last couple of sentences. Give you like 30 seconds to wrap it up. All right. So as I said, this was a scenario that I was a part of. And it's not the first time that I have encountered similar circumstances. I also think that the interplay and like sort of we as physicians, but also as emergency medicine docs, teamwork and multidisciplinary teams are super important. And while we are here in our academic space, recognizing that not every team, not every profession, or every person that you're going to interact with is in like sort of this same mindset or this same, holding sort of maybe the same or differing value systems of how we're going to approach things. And so having some scripting or having some framework to use for other members of your team who are not in that same environment, I think is really important. So I'll open it up and just kind of seek general comments on like how did this feel? Do people think that this is something that they've seen? And if they have, what are some ways that we can or have you used the LIFT method? If you have seen them before and didn't know how to respond, how would you go about doing this now that you've learned some of these methods?
For my part, I tried to, so I played the part of the upstander, so I tried to, when I wasn't really sure if the source of the microaggression was really getting it, I just named it and said, like you said, this is exactly what you did that was disrespectful. And I just tried to, when they started, it was really hard for me, I tried to kind of make it like, well, it's actually not really about you or me, it's about the patient and about making them feel comfortable. It felt really stressful, actually, to be like, I think it's one thing when you say it and they get it, right? If they're like, Emily was like giving me a little bit of a hard time, and they're really not getting it. I was like, okay, I think I just have to say the words, right? Look, when you misgender them, it's really disrespectful, and you make them feel like that you don't care about them. And then I also tried to do assuming best intent, like Tiffany did, and I was talking about it. And I said, look, I know you're a great nurse, and you can give great care. I want this patient. I want them to feel the same from you. I almost misgendered this patient right now, but you know, it's like. Mistakes happen, it's okay. I just want you to be able to try to correct them when you make a mistake.
I think this was a really familiar situation. I think, especially when we have like team members who are kind of saying like, you know, it's too hard, I'm not, you know, I can't do it, I can't learn it. Like that happens to us a lot. And I think it's like the lift method is a good opening conversation, but usually it takes multiple. But I actually had a med student recently, we were doing like a similar kind of workshop, bring up one thing that she's used that's been helpful with like attendings who are kind of saying, I can't, it's too much to learn, I can't keep it all straight, there's too many letters, there's too many new words, is bringing it back to like, well, we learn medical language every day. Like we're renaming diagnoses every day and nobody's giving, some people are giving some pushback, but in general, people aren't giving a ton of pushback when we rename diagnoses from like the person who discovered it to the more pathologic name or physiologic name. If we can do that, what's the difference? Like it's still, she did it in a much more gracious way than I'm saying it, but essentially bringing that back to show like you actually can do it. It's just a matter of wanting to and understanding the value.
One of the things I've struggled with in the past is when you're seeing something and you're like, oh, like would that person want me to like speak up? And coming from it from a frame of not from their standpoint, but saying like, it was offensive to me. Like they may have not found it offensive or they may not want me to say something, but like personalizing to your experience. So that's, I think in this method, something that if you wanted to do it in person potentially, or, I wouldn't want to speak for Quinn, but I could just speak to my experience.
And I think the other point to this is in this particular scenario is like the nurse walked out of the room after doing that. And so there may not have been necessarily a ability to address it with Quinn in the room. But if the nurse was still in the room, another scenario that I had recently was the nurse misgendering the patient multiple times while I was standing there. And so it was uncomfortable, but in the room, I just said, oh, hey, just so you know, Quinn uses they, them pronouns. And the nurse was like super receptive. She's like, oh, sorry. And then we course corrected. And then after left the room, addressed it with the patient in front of me. And it, again, similar, they were like, it happens all the time, but like, thank you for like acknowledging that now. And so obviously every scenario is going to be different, but there is a way to like incorporate the person who might be experiencing that as well.
Again, this is like one of those situations where I can kind of like, I can identify with both sides. So I've been in a situation specifically where I was giving sign out on a patient who used they, them pronouns. And because of the way the patient physically presented, I was just constantly swapping, like switching back and messing up with their pronouns. Like when I was talking, not to the patient, but presenting. And it was really just like, really mortifying because, it was, not mortifying in the sense that no one said anything. No one actually, went out of the way to correct me. But I personally was just like, oh God, like I sound like such an asshole right now. And so, language is difficult. And this is like, this is also just about like language. And so it is tricky. And I think the important thing is just like letting people know that you do care. Like when I'm with the patient and I know what their pronouns are, I literally practice. And before I even walk around, I'm like, how am I going to address them? I'm going to say Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so, or I'm going to call them by their first name. And I prepare that and I get ready because it makes them feel safe. It's not about like, and I think that's like what like it comes back to. Because we were talking about, okay, well, what is Quinn feeling in this moment? And it was like, oh, she's probably annoyed or over it. And I'm like, if I'm Quinn, I'm scared. Because I just realized that if I have a nurse who doesn't really care about my personhood, like I just realized that I have a nurse who doesn't fully see me as a person and who's rolling their eyes. So now I'm freaked out because she's literally the one involved in my care. And that nurse, I played the nurse, I played the bad guy again. And the nurse didn't care. The nurse was just like, this is dumb, this has nothing to do. And the nurse fully believes that she can still give good care while ignoring someone's pronouns. And so you kind of have to make the nurse see that, no, like it does matter because you're letting this person, like you have to take this into account. Yeah.
I still feel deferential. Sorry, I don't want to go for name, but like, I guess I felt like that first thing of like saying, okay, they use they, them pronouns, but then when I got sort of a really, I thought aggressive response back, my first reaction is, are you okay? Is everything okay with you? Because to be honest, I sort of feel like I can't give anybody feedback if they're not in a safe space to take it. And so like my first reaction is like, are you okay? Is everything okay with you? Because like the whole Maya Angelou, like nobody's gonna listen to anything you have to say if they don't feel like they care, you know, and then that's an opportunity to sort of, okay, you're not feeling okay, how can I make you feel okay? And now that I'm aligned with you, I just wanna make sure we bring it back to Quinn, because I don't think Quinn feels very safe right now either. Because I'm afraid, actually, to be honest, when I read this and I think about giving back response and not acknowledging where that person is in their space right now, I actually think it could really backfire and harm Quinn. That's my own impression of this, and I don't know, I just wanna be really sort of intentional about like, how would I actually respond to this? Because that was an aggressive response. I don't know if that person's okay. I don't want to give somebody who's not okay feedback, who's still in the process of actually taking care of somebody who's vulnerable and not feeling safe. So take it as you will. But then it's an opportunity to align.
Yeah, excellent points, everyone. Take maybe one or two more, and then we have one more method.
Yeah, I had something similar happen earlier this year where it wasn't with the pronouns, but it was with using a patient's different name. So on Epic, their name wasn't updated, so it was their dead name that was up there. So it was one of those things where I went in and, hi, so-and-so, and their face just kind of got pale, and I was like, oh, this is what was here, and they're like, oh, it just never got updated, but it was kind of that situation where, okay, like, this is what I saw, and it was something clearly offensive, so kind of just apologize, this is what happened, we'll fix it, we got registration, we're able to kind of update the name and stuff, but it's kind of similar situation, but a little bit different.
Yeah, so I think, again, these are frameworks for you to utilize in all of these different scenarios, and if you are an acronym person and can remember this on the fly, that's excellent if you have it memorized, but really there are more tools for you to have in your back pocket to think, okay, for this example, maybe I would say something like, oh, like I hear you saying this is really hard for you to remember to use someone else's pronouns. I agree. I used to think it was really hard, but then I learned that by using a patient's correct pronouns, it actually can decrease their risk of like further morbidity and mortality for their healthcare experiences. And I know that we really just want to be good and provide excellent patient care because I know you're a great nurse and that's why you're doing your job. And so bringing it back to the person who was doing that experience, but again, having those snippets of the script that you can keep referencing and modify, I think is going to be, in my opinion, is I think part of this workshop is what I would hope everyone takes back to their shops and can start implementing, because these are things that we are already doing, but can do better leaving the room today.
I just wanted to circle back to your thought about like understanding where the person is in their moment. I think one of the things that can be
one of the things that I think can be really helpful is acknowledging that. Be like, it seems like you're really uncomfortable with this. What would be helpful to you right now? Because I have some thoughts I can share, but like I want to make sure that we're like having the same conversation before we kind of delve in there. Could we have this conversation now, or do you want to have this conversation in a few minutes? And then offering people like a path out, because a lot of the like response is embarrassment, right? And like not seeing how to fix it or like save face. And so offering them like, you know, I did talk about it with Quinn before we left the room. This happens to them all the time. I don't actually even know if you need to apologize, but I think if you just make an intentional effort to use their correct pronouns in the future, they'd be fine with it. Or like Quinn was really hurt, and I think just a simple apology would actually go a long way. They're not going to give you a hard time about it, I don't think, but that would be really meaningful. Like giving them some options for how to approach it, I think can be really helpful to people who don't often get called out for making mistakes, because most of us don't call people out, right? Like that's actually a rarity. We all say harmful things all the time, and most of the time no one tells us. And so I think that's been very helpful to me in getting people to engage in the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. We're gonna, I'm gonna pass it to Stacey, and she's gonna take us through our next method.
Thank you. Okay. So the reason that I really like the former two methods, the assist method and the lift method, is that they give you a framework to use when you're not necessarily expecting that you're being in this situation, right? Like if you find yourself to be the source of a microaggression, I've been there. I think many of us can relate to this experience, and it's like that oh crap moment where it's like, how do I respond? But if you have a framework that you've already thought about, then it gives you that easier step of like, okay, wait a minute, I do know actually I can say this, and I can buy myself more time, or I can say, thank you so much, and, seek feedback and that sort of thing. And same thing for the lift method for upstanders. But as Nicole pointed out, not everybody is a acronym person. And so the method that we're going to introduce now is the microaggression toolkit, which is a method by Herrick Fisher. And this is actually like the second version of this toolkit, but in the toolkit, which will be on your table momentarily, is multiple different methods, about 10 or 12 different methods that you can use to respond. Most of these responses are geared for upstanders responding to microaggressions. And what I really like about the toolkit is that as you look through the strategies, you'll notice that they're all very different from each other. And some of them might feel really personal and easy for you to use, and other ones might feel really foreign and like, this is not me at all. I cannot use humor in this kind of a situation. For me, I know that I'm not usually the humor person in this kind of uncomfortable situation. And so, I like a lot of the other approaches on there. And so take a look at this toolkit, and then we're going to do a practice case using some of these tools. And I would encourage you to either pick a tool that you want to use that is aligned with what you think you might say usually, or pick one that is totally different from your usual approach and see how it feels, and see if it's something that you might want to use, or maybe you'll decide that that one is not for you and try a different one. So I'll give you a moment to review that. All right, and you'll notice on the bottom of the toolkit is 2 empty spaces. This is new for the second version of the toolkit, where you can write in your own responses, like what feels appropriate for you. And I really like that if you're somebody who uses the lift method, or if you have another method that works for you really well, or maybe you've discovered a hodgepodge of these methods work for you, you can go ahead and fill in your own methods there. And so we're gonna do a sample case. If you can scan the QR code on the screen, we'll again be role playing. There's gonna be 2 characters with written roles, and the third character is a bystander. So that bystander is gonna be the person to try to attempt to use the toolkit, and then you're welcome to trade roles since it's a short case, and see if there's something that you might say if you were a bystander in this situation.
Yeah, I wanted to share that. So I just
it just might be something that we're complimentary attention to make younger women particularly feel comfortable around. I would feel okay. It was like I'm gonna get in first pass. It was like really clearly not. I was like, why did we say this is a wall? Yeah, I'm not gonna get this situation. Super.
All right, I have heard some really great responses here. We're gonna bring it back, circle it back. We're gonna talk as a larger group about how this exercise felt. Was there any activity on the toolkit that you felt was particularly useful to you, or maybe some that were less useful to you? Anybody have any thoughts? You wanna? Yeah.
Sorry. I more so have a question. I was the observer in the situation, and I think Kamna, she did a wonderful job of she did the state your take claim. She said, hey, she pulled the attending side, said, when I heard you say this, it made me feel away. She did so well, I thought she was reading from a script, and I was like, where is she getting this from? But I kind of have a question for the group, for mainly for the female physicians out here. What do you do when a patient says this to you? Because I'm like, oh, I don't know how to, yeah. So that's more of a question for my learning.
So we were actually just talking about this. I do sometimes I get really snarky, and that's Dr. Sweetie to you, instead of actually just doing my name. But I think it also depends on the patient, right? Because it's the assumption of intent. I had a single shift where I had a drunk white guy call me sugar, and I had an elderly black woman from the South call me sugar. Completely different visceral response to that, right? So, is this a smarmy old white guy who's calling me hun and sweetie as my attending, and I've never worked with him before? Ew. I might not feel comfortable talking to you about him in this situation, but finding some way to address it. Maybe my program director, my advisor, is going to help me address it. I had a colleague who was very touchy at my last job, and I felt very uncomfortable, and I went to the medical director, and the response I got was great. Oh my God, he's doing it again. I've talked to him about it before. I will talk to him, and it changed immediately. But I was very fortunate that I had somebody who I was like, why is this person still working with us? But
I also am curious how people in the room deal with patients versus their coworkers, co-attendings, nurses, residents. Because for me, I feel I hold my coworkers to a higher regard in the language they use with me than I do with my patients, and I'll be offended, but I'll just kind of let it go. Mostly for me, it's being like a very effeminate queer person, and it's like patients have said like horrible things to me, but I usually just like let it go. But if any of my coworkers said that, I'd be like, hello. But does anyone have any sort of feelings or thoughts about that and how they hold people accountable, patients versus staff?
Yeah, I mean, I think context really matters, right? And if it's somebody who's like intoxicated or like psychotic, right? I think we all have a different standard of tolerance there. And I think when it's coming from a patient, it's very hard to do that yourself. And I think I rely much more on my colleagues to say something to the patient. And I take my role as the attending very seriously when I hear a patient saying something offensive to one of my residents, where I'm like, hey, that language is unacceptable. We have a code of conduct here. And like, I get that you are sick and I want to take care of you. I want to help you, but you may not speak to my staff that way, even though you are in pain. I'm happy to have a conversation about what is acceptable or unacceptable language, but you may not speak that way. And I like lay that down as a ground rule with patients. But I can't do that when it's somebody calling me sweetie necessarily. Like sometimes I'll get snarky, but like usually I just let that go. I think it's easier to be an upstander with patients than it is to be like responsive when you're being targeted by a patient.
I agree with you as far as like, I think with patients, it's like sort of setting the ground rules of like, that's not acceptable. I think I also hold my co-attending, and I think in this dynamic, being an attending physician versus a co-resident is a very different animal, because you're coming from a position of power, and I think as a female attending talking to another attending, that's the kind of thing where I'm like, you probably just don't know this, and I don't know how you might take this, but can we have a conversation for a sec? Because I know that this hit me a little bit, and I wanted to share, and that was kind of the way you approached it, which was so lovely, of like, hey, is this a good time? I just want to share some thoughts, which I thought was really nice. I don't know if it would have been very different as a resident, if you were the resident upstairs.
Yeah, I was just going to respond to what you were saying when asking how to respond to patients. I don't always have a great response. I wish I did. The other day, a patient was like, oh, I'm so dizzy, I'm seeing double. But in this instance, it's a good thing. And it's like, what do you say to that, I'm like, okay, buddy, I'm going to go now. A lot of times I try to turn it around and use humor. Like when people say, oh, you look too young to be a doctor. I'm like, I know, they don't let you go outside. My skin is fantastic, something like that. But I think it's so different when it's a patient, and when it's a patient who is clearly saying something that's over the line versus in maybe a backhanded way. It's so different.
Yeah, I was gonna say, with regards to what I had said, I think in the role play context, I was like very confident. I was punching out the words, but like in an actual scenario, I don't know if I would have like the capacity to say that, especially like as a med student, and then even in the future, like as maybe like a resident, hopefully next year. But like when you're being evaluated by your colleagues or by uppers and things like that, like what do you guys suggest? Like, because I've experienced at the VA exactly what you said at the VA multiple times, and there's just like this weird feeling of, if I say something to my resident, are they gonna do something, or is it something that I can just live with for a bit? Like, what's that role like as someone who's being evaluated or a student?
I think we all just keep highlighting how much easier it is to be an upstander than it is to represent yourself in these difficult moments. And like that's a really big takeaway for this toolkit of, you really not need to, but ought to step in when you can, as you can, because that person is probably not comfortable, able, or in the moment to do that themselves, because that shit is hard.
I think we have time for one more comment, so I'm going to come over here.
So I'll be quick. I hope to speak to your scenario. So as a resident, there was one attending who I liked and who was very cool, and he was kind of close to our age, so he was like very fun. But he had a habit of doing the whole massage your back thing. Yeah. And so it was right around the time that like Biden was up for election, and like everybody was joking about how touchy-feely Biden was. And so we're on shift, and Dr. So-and-so is doing giving somebody massage. I believe it was consensual, like whatever. But so someone like made like someone said something, and he kind of like, brushed it off. And I, as the resident, I was just like, it's giving Joe Biden vibes. And he stopped immediately. And like, he didn't really, and so I think humor is actually something that can be really useful in a lot of situations, like just to kind of diffuse the situation. Like, that was funny, because the guys were messy over there.
And then he was like, oh shit, like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I could see something like kind of like connect, like, look, I want to be optics.
Yeah,
that's
that's really great. And I think that's a really good point, that every time that we're, using one of these techniques and calling something out as we see it, we are potentially affecting behavior and culture change as well, in terms of people being, called into this culture of equity and helping each other feel a sense of belonging in our spaces, in the clinical environment and the education environment. And so hopefully you found at least a few of these techniques useful, and I'll pass it over to Sree for the wrap up.
Yeah. And so just a few, we shared a lot of different strategies and techniques for being an upstander, but a few things that kind of resonate for all of them is one, just making the invisible visible, right? It's just to recognize that it's happening. And I think walking into the, clinical space, we should recognize that every single shift, if you're like, oh, I didn't see this today, then maybe you weren't looking for it. It's every shift, right? Every day, every hour, it'll happen. And so just being aware of that. And then also just being thoughtful, what is your technique based on being authentic to yourself? How are you going to speak up and find your voice in that spot itself? And then education, I find, coming from that place of curiosity is always the best place to kind of approach this, the intent versus impact, and especially using those phrases such as like, I used to say things like that until I learned about this. I use that a lot with my nurses and my staff and my students and my residents as well. I used to say that until I learned, that patients who are obese have worse care because they don't seek care because they don't feel like they belong, right? And there's a lot of different things you can kind of share with that are non-compliant versus non-adherent, right? Some of this language that we use to label our patients. So just being thoughtful of just saying like, this is what I learned and I'm gonna share it with you because I also didn't know that is a great way to kind of use that education piece. And then just, seeking external like interventions. So just kind of debriefing outside. So if it's an intense situation, we're not saying you have to react every single time. There will be some times that are appropriate, sometimes that are not. Having self-compassion on yourself, if you can't find those words, that's okay. At least you recognize that it was happening. And maybe the next time you could kind of practice in your mind. But also giving yourself the break to not perseverate over it for weeks and months later instead, because this is a long road. And all we can say is each day I'll try to be better. And that's kind of the most important thing. So these are kind of the three main points. And really supporting your learners. So if you can't speak in the room about it, then definitely at the very least, just walk. I do walk and talk is what I say. Let's walk and talk for a little bit. We walk in the back hallway where there's no patient rooms, just so I can say, like, I wish I could have said this. This is what bothered me about the situation, or XYZ, how did you feel? Just at least touching base so that we can get back to work in a better place and they can feel supported is really key. So we're going to hand it out for our kind of wrap up and call to action.
All right, everyone. I feel so just grateful to have been part of this group this morning, and I feel like I've been through a couple iterations of this, and every time with the different people that come in and the other perspectives, I just always learn so much. We have 15 minutes until lunchtime, and I'm sure you're all desperately wondering when that's going to happen. So I promise we will keep it brief, and we will keep you, and we will get you out of here on time. But there's been so much good content over the last several hours. And this always happens to me every time I go to a conference where you're like, this was amazing, and then you fly home, and then there's this moment when reality hits and you're like, oh, that's right, I am back where I started. And so we were hoping to just leave you with a few items to just take with you on that plane ride home or that car ride home that you can actually keep the momentum going and start thinking about how to actually implement some, institution level or departmental level or program level changes at your current institution. One of the really big principles that hit me when I first started learning about change management, because this really is change management, is something that the director of my master's degree program told me, who said, you never want to be the unwanted solution to the unperceived problem. And I always think about that every time I get really excited about a new idea or a concept or something I want to bring home. And so really this boils down to doing your homework ahead of time. You may be all fired up and jazzed and energized about whatever it is that you learned here in this room or here at this conference, but you have to remember that all the other people you work with may not have been in the room with you at the time. And so recognizing that it's worthwhile really to do a little bit of homework, consider what are going to be your big obstacles, what are going to be your challenges, who are your supporters going to be, how are you going to build a powerful coalition, how are you going to create a vision, and that is all way before you start thinking about, we're going to do a faculty development session, or we're going to implement holistic review, where everyone likes to jump to the meat of the change, but really taking the time to set it up and to think about it ahead of time can help a lot. Around the room, just out of curiosity, can we do some, let's just throw it out there. What are you taking home today? What, out of this, this last several hours,
what is one thing that you're going to take home today? One thing, there's a ton. Kamna.
I'm going to breathe before I react or receive.
Breathing is such a powerful thing. It allows you to ground yourself, and also, for those people like me who can't remember all those acronyms, I can at least remember maybe the L part of lift or something. Yeah, I love that.
I'm trying to come back to some of those microaggressions that may have dissipated away. That still scares me.
It takes a lot of courage to do that, and also a lot of vulnerability from your side to accept that, you know what, there's something here, they may be okay with it, but I'm not okay with it, and I want to do it right.
I really want to intentionally place the microaggression response toolkit into my practice as I transition to senior resident next year.
Ooh. Yeah. But I think what you're keying in also is like, this is, what we're trying to do here is creating or cultivating an inclusive learning environment, which also starts with you. We can try different approaches. There's no one size fits all solution for the different contexts that we're going to be exposed to. So try one thing, and that's okay if you fail, right? But at least you learn something, and then you're going to try a different way next time. What else?
I'm going to try to preemptively invite microaggression observations on the shift. So like to the whole team, instead of like, what do you want to learn today? Be like, you know, microaggressions happen all the time. They take many different forms. I'm going to miss some of them. Would love to invite feedback, both for me and observations of other folks in the department.
I love that, because oftentimes we get so nervous that we have to have teaching points and chalk talks. But creating this, like for today's shift, let's just watch something about like the different ways microaggression will surface, and then creating a space for you to have a communication about it. Yeah, love that.
I want to look at our committee structure for CCC and also for our evaluation, and basically think about the committees and who on the committee is in charge of bias mitigation. Like, does somebody
Right.
have a role for that? I know that that's one of the strategies that we talked about.
So moving away from just self-awareness, but also like an institutional awareness of what's happening, because then the systemic racism that was listed earlier, we can address it better.
I have two.
Love it.
Talking about self-compassion and kind of the last discussion about like how we do this for ourselves.
Yeah.
In difficult situations. So just trying to have the courage to advocate for myself with the same fierceness that I would advocate for patients and my colleagues. And then second, if I do mess up somewhere, I think humility just goes an extremely long way, and
Yeah.
it fosters a really good environment for learning.
And they actually go hand in hand. You can't truly be humble if you're not kind to yourself, because then you're constantly trying to defend yourself inside. And so when you're practicing that self-compassion, then you're able to accept the imperfections that we all have. We always talk about growth mindsets, but the reality is we cannot have a growth mindset if we're not kind to ourselves. So I love that, those two.
So, in like pretty soon, I'll be kind of sitting on the other side of the table, being a senior, where I think one thing I want to try to take away is just being a little bit more active in identifying. And part of it, what I was just thinking about earlier, is kind of just being a little bit more, we're kind of standing up for myself a little bit more. These microaggressions happen all the time, and it's from whenever I started after high school. So it's something that doesn't really bother me anymore. I do kind of the same thing, where it's like, oh, I just assumed the best intent. And there's a bunch of these things that don't really bother me. But something that doesn't bother me can be devastating for someone who's the first time they're doing it. So if I don't call it out and being like, oh, like that was something bad that happened to me, they may just assume that I don't care about it. So I think just being defensive a little bit, not defensive, but addressing a little bit more when it happens to me in front of other people, because that may be a Tuesday for me, but that may be one of the worst things that happened to this person on their clinical shift or something like that.
There's many things here. Two things that I'm learning from this conversation is, one, we often think that I'm just about to become a senior resident. I'm just about to, but we forget that each of us has the capacity to make a significant change and impact in our little environment, whatever that thing is. And so what Dr. Natesan brought up earlier about the withins and the beyonds, like knowing what is within your control, including all my life I've dealt with this microaggression, I've tolerated it, and now I'm about to change it. So the idea of end, you can deal with a lot of these things, and also you can call it out now. Love it.
I think being aware of your own changing privilege, especially right, like those of us who are younger attendings, you may remember coming from nothing and then also kind of slugging it this whole time. But now we're attendings and we have privilege and power. We have a salary, and it means that you automatically are at a different
so the context of who we are changes because of the intersectionalities of our identities. And so in one sense, we may be feeling like we're the oppressed, and then in another, the same exact scenario, but in a different environment can mean that you are the aggressor. Love that.
I mean, all of this requires a degree of self-awareness, both of like how you feel in your body, where you are in your career, and and all of those other aspects. Ernesto?
For me, I really love the idea of like considering, from my viewpoint, if I'm sort of jeopardizing someone's feelings of safety, dignity, or belonging, and really trying to, as I prepare for those risky meetings, to at least start to troubleshoot what may come up for folks.
I shared this in the talk across the hall. Oftentimes we get nervous when we're in a situation that we're not comfortable with. But one thing that we can remember is, what would it look like when I was an intern or when I was a med student, and just be that senior resident or that attending that you wish you had when you're going through that at that moment. And so that preserves your safety, dignity, and belonging. But then it makes it a little bit more personal, because then it brings you back to a moment when you also felt that you needed that. And now you're in a position to give that back to that other person. I love that.
I've been thinking about the scenario with putting the patient, whether to step in at that moment or go outside.
Yeah.
How, as being in a growth mindset, frequently, like, I don't want to do more harm. So
Yeah.
sometimes you don't say that. But recognizing that fear is still something as part of the growth mindset, and welcoming those mistakes and like holding on to those, because that's how you're going to grow and learn to respond better in the future.
What we're doing now, which is kind of extracting a little bit of granular learning points, is something that we can do in every shift, right? So even starting, hey, today let's just focus on watching incidents of microaggression, and then you learn something, and then reinforcing that, hey, here's one more thing that I learned today, which is kind of like what we did here today, right? Like, not a lot of script. You gave us all the scripts here, and we're just adding, oh yeah, we're just connecting. So each of you now are equipped with a lot of tools so you can then reinforce for your co-attending, your colleague, your patient. Because again, it's all about safety, dignity, and belonging. That's for all of us. Everybody will want that.
Right, so hopefully this was really powerful. I mean, I know many of you offered insights in terms of what you're going to bring home, how you're going to change your behavior, gain more self-awareness, more insight, be a better upstander to other people. But with each one of those every actions that we do, and each one of those considerations and those self-reflections, it'll bring us closer towards creating a better learning environment for everybody. So thank you all for coming today.
I just wanted to, before we end, give Sree an enormous shout out. She organized all of us. And I just like huge kudos. I think half of us came up to her and were like, I'm so sorry I didn't get you my slides. I'm so sorry I didn't do all the things on time, very much including myself in this. So any success here is very much due to Shree's part here. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Do you have anything else we're supposed to go over?
I was walking up here just to give a shout out to the facilitators, actually, which, and all of you as well, too, because I think these sessions are only powerful and only impactful with everyone showing up and wanting to learn from each other. So as much as we have taught you, you've taught us as well, too, and we're leaving here feeling fulfilled and carrying lessons with us from all of you as well, too. So thank you for planting those seeds that we can grow together and really see this inclusive environment that we're looking for as well. So thank you, guys.
Thank you all. Thank you all. Last plug, if anybody is in New York City or adjacent, and you will be there around May 30th, my team and I are hosting a conversation at sort of the national scene of what's the state of the union on DEI work. If you would like to join us in person, the in-person part is invite only. If you'd like to join us virtually, you got probably spam email from me through your membership in either ADIEM or the Social Emergency Medicine Group or AWEM with a link to register for the National Health Equity Grand Rounds. Conversation will also feature the one and only Dr. Denise Rojas Marquez, who's here in the room with us, along with an incredible list of national thought leaders. So if you're going to be in New York and you'd like an invite in person, come see me and I'll add you to the invite list.